Chapter 653, Xian Yi's Sword. Chapter 653, Xian Yi's Sword. Xian Yi paused, and then he continued, I promised you that you would become an inner disciple of the ancient sect at the end of round 3. This has not changed. In the ancient sect, no matter what you want, you have to fight for it yourself. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang frowned slightly. Shi Qianhan. Xian Yi looked at Shi Qianhan and said in a cold voice, You have promised him a lot, but if his growth in the Cloud Sea Asgard doesn't meet your expectations, I'm afraid you will not keep your promise, right? Shi Qianhan's eyes froze a little. In the Cloud Sea Asgard, there were many disciples, and the competition between them was stiff. Everything depended on strength. He had promised Jian Wushuang a lot, but if Jian Wushuang didn't perform well in the Cloud Sea Asgard, to not waste the resources, the Cloud Sea Asgard would certainly not keep their promise. Humph! Xian Yi snorted. Then he turned to Jian Wushuang, said, Young man, people in the firmament territory know who I am. If I bring you back to the ancient sect, I will try my best to support you and improve your strength to a higher level even if your potential is exhausted. It is what I can promise you, and this is also what the ancient sect can promise you. The ancient sect will never give up on any of its disciples no matter how weak his strength or talent is. The words reverberated through the whole battlefield and inspired all those present. His promise was much more sincere than Shi Qianhan's. Jian Wushuang was also moved. Turning to Shi Qianhan, he was clear at a glance. Although he promised me a lot, I could only get them based on improvement in strength, which means that I have to fight for it by myself. It's the same with what the ancient sect has promised me. Compared with Shi Qianhan, Master Xian Yi is much more sincere. The ancient sect will never give up on any of its disciples. Jian Wushuang clenched his fists and made a decision. Then he raised his head. Master Xian Yi, I have decided to join the ancient sect. Jian Wushuang said earnestly. Then he turned to Shi Qianhan and said, I'm sorry, Elder Shi. Your offer is tempting, but Master Xian Yi had invited me at the end of round 3. I cannot refuse him. Xian Yi smiled slightly. It seemed he had already expected this result. But Shi Qianhan became angry as a hint of cruelty flashed in his eyes. Young man, think about it carefully. As the most powerful sect in the firmament territory, the Cloud Sea Asgard has the most resources. What's more, you have just come to the eternal world. I'm afraid you are not aware of the danger here. It's easy to be killed without the protection of a powerful sect. In the firmament territory, only the Cloud Sea Asgard can protect you from being killed by others. Take this seriously. Shi Qianhan spat out the last sentence. Hearing that, many geniuses on the drill grounds and experts in the Skyward Pavilion frowned. They were aware that Shi Qianhan was hinting at something. It was more like a threat. Yes, it was a threat. He threatened that if Jian Wushuang didn't join the Cloud Sea Asgard, the Cloud Sea Asgard would become his enemy and kill him one day. Jian Wushuang was sullen. Having experienced so much in the ancient world, he understood what Shi Qianhan was saying. He looked over at Xian Yi. This was the someone he had to depend on. Shi Qianhan. Xian Yi's calm and cold voice arose. What? Did I say something wrong? Shi Qianhan glanced at Xian Yi, being high-handed as the 9th elder of the Cloud Sea Asgard, the most powerful sect in the firmament territory. No, you're right. Xian Yi nodded slightly. The eternal world is a dangerous place. So you agree with me? Shi Qianhan said with a cold smile, but suddenly his smile froze. He saw a sparkling sword light heading towards him. An ice-cold and dazzling sword light. Everyone's attention was caught by it as soon as it appeared. They couldn't help staring at it. Then the sword light moved fast. So fast, so fast, as if it had gone beyond the limit of time and space. At an incredible speed. Facing the unexpected attack, all of them were astonished. Shi Qianhan was panic-stricken. He had never expected that Xian, who was calm and nice just now, would suddenly attack him with such a terrible killing move. It was too fast. Geniuses on the drill grounds, including Jian Wushuang and Gong Chao, couldn't see it clearly. Even the top divine realm experts in the Skyward Pavilion couldn't do it. Only a few of the eternal realm experts present could do this, but they still couldn't follow it, such as Shi Qianhan. As the sword approached, Shi Qianhan couldn't even defend against it. He could only cry out. Whoosh! The dazzling sword light passed through. Shi Qianhan's body was cut in half like a piece of paper. Although they had not yet figured out how the sword moved, they saw clearly at the next moment that Shi Qianhan, the ninth elder of the Cloud Sea Asgard, had already been cut in half. Chapter 654. A man can't be offended. Chapter 654. A man can't be offended. Silence. The huge drill ground was in silence. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Many geniuses on the drill ground and experts in the Skyward Pavilion gazed upon this scene in awe. Did he die? Jian Wushuang's eyes were fixed in a blank stare. As an elder of the Cloud Sea Asgard, Shi Qianhan was an eternal realm expert. Experts like him were masters in the firmament territory. However, Xian cut him in half with one strike of his sword. That strike, it haunted in Jian Wushuang's memory. A swift and frightening strike. It had been too fast and too terrifying. Among all the geniuses present, Jian Wushuang's cultivated the principle of the sword more than the others. But even he couldn't comprehend the blow from that sword. He just felt it was too powerful. Right then, an angry voice called out. It was Shi Qianhan. What? Many of the geniuses on the drill ground had become frantic. Their hair stood on end seeing Shi Qianhan's body cut in half. His upper half rose into the air, his face flamed with anger, and his eyes fixed on Xian. How could it be possible? Jian Wushuang was stunned. How could he survive being cut in half? I heard that the eternal realm expert would continue to live as long as his life core was unbroken. It seems it's true. The geniuses of the eternal world recalled. Upon hearing this, Jian Wushuang felt overwhelmed. Life core. As long as the life core remained intact, he would live. Jian Wushuang looked around. Seeing that the experts who were walking out of the Skyward Pavilion didn't seem surprised. Apparently they knew Shi Qianhan was not dead. But they were still shocked. Few of them had seen Xian fight before. They were shocked by his strength. Xian, how dare you? Shi Qianhan's face twisted, and he stared at Xian with hatred in his eyes. Suddenly, whoosh! A ghost-like figure appeared in front of him, no less than a meter away. It was Xian. His face had changed from a soft gaze to an ice-cold stare. Anyone who met his stare would start to shiver uncontrollably. Shi Qianhan. Xian called him, his voice heavy, with the intent of killing Shi Qianhan. Shi Qianhan's eyes were wide open and filled with fear. Terrified, the terror flooded Shi Qianhan's mind. He felt Xian. He held his life in his hands. I agree with you. The eternal world is dangerous. Xian said calmly. Huh. Shi Qianhan looked in horror at Xian. He couldn't understand why he said that. In the dangerous world, it is not only Jian Wushuang, but you also need to be careful. In the eternal world, Even in the firmament territory, there are many people that could kill you. Xian, he said in a cold voice. How dare you? Shi Qianhan gazed at Xian Yi, his eyes conveying both fear and anger. Xian Yi grinned, a gruesome smile like a sharp knife. Then he moved forward, whispered in Shi Qianhan's ear, Shi Qianhan, ask your palace master whether or not I dare to kill you, what he does if I do kill you. Make sure he understands. Tell him I will kill any of the Cloud Sea Asgard that threatens a disciple of the ancient sect. Tell him everything. Shi Qianhan gulped. His fear had intensified, and a cold sweat had broken out on his forehead. The elder of the immortal dynasty and the evil lady of the boundless demon sect looked pitifully at Shi Qianhan as if he was a fool. Foolish! How dare he threaten Jian Wushuang in front of Xian Yi? Does he really think Xian Yi is a pushover? The elder of the immortal dynasty sneered. He really thought the Cloud Sea Asgard was the most powerful sect in the firmament territory. How reckless he is to offend Xian Yi in public. Usually, Xian Yi is nice and easygoing. Usually. But if he got angry, he would definitely launch a massacre. I have not seen it with my own eyes, though I have heard tales of it. When Xian Yi made waves in the firmament territory, the palace master of the Cloud Sea Asgard had not yet been born. The evil lady of the boundless demon sect also sneered. They were smarter than Shi Qianhan. They knew that the person in the firmament territory couldn't be offended. Long ago, their sect masters had warned them that two people in the ancient sect couldn't be offended. One was the ancient sect's master. The other one was Xian Yi. They were told that the ancient sect was a special sect inside the firmament territory, and Xian was the special one in the ancient sect. Therefore, they dared not offend Xian Yi. However, in his stupidity, Shi Qianhan had done so today. The drill ground was silent. Everybody on the ground looked on in shock. Shi Qianhan did not dare say another word, fearing that Xian Yi would kill him, because Xian Yi could easily do so. Jian Wushuang. Xian Yi softened his demeanor and looked at Jian Wushuang. He said softly, Don't worry. As you're a disciple of the ancient sect, they will protect you. No one will hurt you unless the ancient sect gets destroyed. Chapter 655. The Ending. Chapter 655. The Ending. Finally, Jian Wushuang still chose to join the ancient sect. The experts were not surprised about his decision, but Shi Qianhan was humiliated and lost all face. Perhaps the Cloud Sea Asgard was indeed very strong, but Shi Qianhan relied only on this to compete with Xian Yi, which was pretty ridiculous. In the fourth round, the cultivation ages were still being checked. Numerous geniuses received their results, and some of the cultivation ages were also very short, but still Jian Wushuang was vastly superior to the others. Soon, all the geniuses finished the examination, and the last round of the genius battle was completely over. The Firmament Territory Feast, which was held every 3,000 years and attracted numerous sects in the Firmament Territory, was finally finished. Next, most of the geniuses chose to join their own sects. Jian Wushuang, Feng, Huaying, and the other geniuses who were from the ancient world all became the disciples of the ancient sect. Jian Wushuang. A figure appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. Gong Chao. Jian Wushuang looked at him. You really have good talent. I am looking forward to fighting with you, Gong Chao said. Me too. Jian Wushuang slightly smiled. In this Firmament Territory Feast, Gong Chao was at the top based on his strength, but Jian Wushuang was the best according to talent. No rush, you two definitely can compete one day. A gentle man in a purple robe walked towards them. Xian Yi Lord. Jian Wushuang and Gong Chao both bowed to him. Although Gong Chao didn't join the ancient sect, he respected Xian Yi, who was the number one in the firmament territory of the eternal realm. Soon, there will be an exchange between the ancient sect and the Cloud Sea Asgard. You two can compete at that moment, Xian Yi answered with a smile. Really? Jian Wushuang and Gong Chao both raised their eyebrows. I'm waiting for you to challenge me, Gong Chao said. Trust me, I won't disappoint you. Jian Wushuang slightly smiled. After that, Gong Chao went to Cloud Sea Asgard with Shi Qianhan, who had already recovered. You six follow me to the ancient sect. Xian Yi waved. Jian Wushuang, Feng, and the other people quickly looked at each other and then followed. On the way to the ancient sect, they all had a hint of anticipation. They wanted to know, as one of the top sects, what unique features it had to surpass the other three powerhouses in the firmament territory. Following Xian Yi for 2 days, the 6 people finally arrived at the ancient sect. The firmament territory was very vast. The ancient sect, as one of the top sects there, was located in a huge and ancient mountain range. This mountain range, with countless alpine jungles, stretched for thousands of miles, and the ancient sect was in its center. Above the void, Jian Wushuang, Feng, Huang, Bingshan, Xianing, and Wu Huang were floating patiently. They all respectfully stared at the giant and ancient sect which was in front of them. This old sect was under the protection of a huge formation. The formation was mysterious and powerful. Inside the sect, there were many giant mountains, and in the valleys between the mountains, there were a large number of palaces and pavilions. Magnificent and huge. At the same time, its ancient aura was overflowing as well. The spiritual power here. Jian Wushuang looked around and realized the heaven and earth spiritual energy in this void was much more powerful than the other places in the eternal world. Not only the heaven and earth spiritual energy, but also the origin energy was stronger than any other place. That's the ancient sect, not to mention others. Its location is already superior to other places. Jian Wushuang admired this deeply. Follow me, Xian Yi said, and then he went straight to the interior of the sect. The experts within all expected and knew Xian Yi, so they didn't activate the huge formation when they saw him. When Jian Wushuang and the others followed Xian Yi to enter the ancient sect, they kept looking around and could sense a tremendous aura nearby. You 6 just arrived here, but you all will cultivate here, so I will tell you our rules and some news about the ancient sect, Xian Yi said. Jian Wushuang and the others listened carefully. You must have already received some information about the unique features of our ancient sect. Although we ancient sect is only one of the top sects in the firmament territory, we are much better than the other 3 powerhouses, especially in training our disciples. Now, I can't tell you why, but you will know about it when the time is right, Xian Yi said. Let me tell you some details about the internal situation of the ancient sect now. In the ancient sect, we have plenty of cultivation resources, which includes 1 mountain and 3 palaces. 1 mountain and 3 palaces. Jian Wushuang was confused. These 1 mountain and 3 palaces are related to the foundation of the ancient sect. Let me show you the mountain first, Xian Yi said. Soon, they reached a huge giant mountain. Inside the ancient sect, there were hundreds of similar giant mountains, but this one in front of them was totally covered by a huge formation. This gave one the feeling of extreme mystery. This giant mountain. Jian Wushuang frowned and stared at it. He felt so familiar with it. This giant mountain is called Enlightenment Mountain, Xian Yi said. Enlightenment Mountain? Jian Wushuang, Feng, and the others were shocked. Before, in the second round of the genius battle, The geniuses had already known about the Enlightenment Mountain and had stayed there for 1 full month. They also had spent 1 month there, so they were all familiar with the name. The characteristics of this Enlightenment Mountain are the same as the one that you stayed in the Firmament Territory feast. After all, that one simulates ours, Xian said with a smile. That's it. Jian, Wushuang, Feng, and the others suddenly understood. You all stayed and cultivated Tao in the Enlightenment Mountain before, so you should know that the cultivation speed inside, it is twice as fast compared to the outside. However, the speed here is at least 3 times faster, Xian said. Chapter 656, 3 Palaces in the Ancient Sect, Part 1. Chapter 656, 3 Palaces in the Ancient Sect, Part 1. On hearing this, Jian Wushuang's, Feng's, and the others' eyes lit up. They knew how useful it was, as they had previously stayed in the Enlightenment Mountain for 1 month. Especially Jian Wushuang. He had obtained a significant improvement during that month. But now cultivating here could be 2 times faster than before, which was even more effective. Don't be too excited now. When Xian saw these 6 excited faces, he smiled and said, although the effect of cultivating in this Enlightenment Mountain is much better, not everyone can meditate here. In the ancient sect, only the inner disciples are qualified to cultivate in it. Only for the inner disciples. Bingshan, Xianing, and Wu Huang suddenly felt a bit lost and disappointed. These 3 were outer disciples, so they couldn't get into the Enlightenment Mountain. Only Jian Wushuang, Feng, and Huoying were able to cultivate inside. Jian Wushuang, Feng, Huoying. Xianing looked at them. You 3 are our inner disciples, so you can cultivate here. There are 36 cave mansions in the Enlightenment Mountain, and 33 of them are occupied, so you guys can pick those 3. Yes. Feng and Huoying nodded immediately. There are 36 cave mansions in this Enlightenment Mountain. Jian Wushuang frowned and asked, Xian Lord, you just mentioned that as long as they are inner disciples, they can cultivate in it. But there are only 36 cave mansions. So, are there only 36 inner disciples in the ancient sect? You are already one of our disciples, so you don't need to call me Xian Lord. The disciples here call me Xian Palace Master, and you can follow them. Xian mentioned a side point and continued, you are right. We only have 36 inner disciples, and that's already a lot. By the way, there are no more than 36 inner disciples in the ancient sect. Why is it? Jian Wushuang was puzzled. The sects with strong strength in the ancient world always took millions of disciples. The ancient sect as a top sect which only ranked behind the 3 magnates in the Firmament Territory should have taken on a large number of disciples. Only 36 inner disciples sounded like this was really too few. We only can accept 36 people to meditate and cultivate in the Enlightenment Mountain at once, and also we want to encourage the inner disciples to compete. So that's why we only have 36, Xian patiently explained. In the ancient sect, the inner disciples and the outer disciples can all fight for the cultivation resource. There is a competition every 10 years here for our disciples. Every time, some of the inner disciples who are not good enough would be replaced by the outer disciples. After all, there are only 36 inner disciples, but numerous outer disciples. Some of the outer disciples are real geniuses, and some were inner disciples before, so their strength is also very strong. Every sect competition, some inner disciples whose strength are weaker would be challenged by the outer disciples, but only a couple of them could withstand it. That's it. Jian Wushuang and the others all understood. The sect competition, which was held every 10 years, could decide the identity of disciples based on their strength, that indeed enhanced the competition between the outer and inner disciples. As long as the outer disciples could have a fast improvement and strong strength, they could also become inner disciples. Likewise, if the inner disciples were defeated, they would become outer disciples. At the previous sect competition, which was held 8 years ago, the next one will be in 2 years. Jian, Wushuang, Feng, and Huang, since you 3 just got here, your strength is weaker than the other inner disciples or even some outer disciples. Therefore, during these 2 years, you need to work really hard to keep your identity, Xian said with a mysterious smile. On hearing this, Jian, Wushuang, Feng, and Huang all felt a hint of pressure. In 2 years, the sect competition would start again. Since they just joined the ancient sect, their strength was at the bottom. It was really not easy for them to remain inner disciples. However, you don't need to worry too much. Since you are new here, you definitely will get a big improvement with the resources of the ancient sect. Besides, even if you become an outer disciple in 2 years, you can get it back in the next sect competition. It is held every 10 years. 10 years will pass pretty fast, Xian said and smiled. Even though Xian tried to make them relax, they 3 were still nervous about it. Okay, so let me tell you the details about the 3 palaces in the ancient sect. Xian continued. These 3 palaces are Tao Palace, Sword Palace, and Divine Palace. Tao Palace is to cultivate Tao. There are 13 palace masters in the Tao Palace, and all of them are experts who had comprehended a super high-level Tao in the eternal realm. Other than that, there are numerous vice palace masters who are superior divine realm experts, so they also have a good comprehension of Tao. The palace masters and vice palace masters always gather in the Tao Palace and record their insights and opportunities which can be obtained by our disciples. You also can go to listen to their lectures and even choose to join their sects and become their disciples. Usually, the disciples here all join one sect of the palace masters or vice palace masters. Some experts even join 2 or 3 at the same time. The masters there will guide you and help you to apply necessary natural treasures while you are cultivating. Jian, Wushuang, and the others were all surprised. Almost all the disciples of the ancient sect joined the sects of the palace masters or vice palace masters in the Tao Palace. You just got here, so it would be better for you to choose the right masters, join their sects, and become their disciples. Even though you can only be a nominal disciple, it would be much better than for you to cultivate by yourself without any guide, Xian said. Chapter 657, 3 Palaces in the Ancient Sect, Part 2. Chapter 657, 3 Palaces in the Ancient Sect, Part 2. Jian, Wushuang, Feng, and Huang all agreed with Xian. They had just arrived at the eternal world and met experts from a higher level. Although they knew that the divine realm, eternal realm, and even Tao Master were above the skyscraping realm, they didn't know how to progress after that at all. It would be much better and easier to have an expert to guide them. Xian continued. Apart from the Tao Palace, the Sword Palace, and the Divine Palace are also in the ancient sect. Sword Palace, as its name, is for people to cultivate the sword principle. It is also very unique in the ancient sect. All the warriors who are good at longsword Tao cultivate in the Sword Palace. However, there are only 1 palace master and 2 vice palace masters in it. The 2 vice palace masters are eternal realm experts who are good at longsword Tao, and the palace master, Xian smiled mysteriously and said, I'm the palace master in the Sword Palace. On hearing that, Jian, Wushuang, and the other people were not surprised. In the Firmament Territory Feast, Xian divided Shi Qianhan into 2 parts with his swordsmanship. That showed how good he was at sword principle. Besides, he was also acknowledged as the #1 eternal realm in the Firmament Territory, so he was the most appropriate person to be the palace master in the Sword Palace. As for the Divine Palace, Xian Yi hesitated for a moment and continued. It gathered numerous divine, realm warriors in the ancient sect. There is a rule in our sect. The disciples can be in the ancient sect for no more than 500 years. Anyone who is here more than that, they can't have the same treatment as our disciples, which means they can't cultivate in the Tao Palace and the Sword Palace, and also can't stay in the Enlightenment Mountain. The only place that they can go is the Divine Palace. Inside the Divine Palace, there are lots of dangerous tasks that are assigned by the ancient sect and the divine realm experts who represent our ancient sect to fight to the death outside. You can think about it like this. The ancient sect will train you for the first 500 years. After that, you need to contribute to us. The 6 people all nodded slightly. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Since they chose to join the sect and use its resources, then when their strength was strong enough, they should contribute to the sect. Xian Yi Palace Master, a black-clothed elder, popped up in the void and bowed respectfully to Xian Yi. Then he looked at Jian Wushuang and the other people. These should be the 6 geniuses that Xian Yi Palace Master took from the Firmament Territory Feast. Give me the tokens, Xian Yi said. The black-clothed elder immediately gave 6 tokens to Xian Yi, and then Xian Yi gave 1 to each of the 6 people. This is your ID token. Of course, the outer disciples and the inner disciples are different, Xian Yi said. Jian Wushuang and the others took it without hesitation. They refined their own tokens. Daoyun, these kids just arrived at the ancient sect, so they are new here. I've explained the Enlightenment Mountain and 3 palaces to them, so please take them to look around the place, Xian Yi ordered. Yes, the black-clothed elder Daoyun nodded respectfully. Jian Wushuang, you stay here and the other 5 follow him, Xian Yi said. Immediately, Feng, Huaying, and the others left with Daoyun, but Jian Wushuang still stood in front of Xian Yi. Jian Wushuang, among these 6, you are the only one who is good at longsword Dao and whose talent is the best. Follow me and I can show you the Sword Palace, Xian Yi said. Sword Palace? Jian Wushuang was excited and instantly followed Xian Yi. Soon after, Jian Wushuang arrived at the Sword Palace. It was gigantic and was like a giant island standing on the ground. There were hundreds of buildings on it. The tremendous sword essence also shocked Jian Wushuang a lot. Outside the Sword Palace, there were lots of experts patrolling. Obviously, these experts were all Divine Realm experts, and they all had auras that really terrified Jian Wushuang. In the eternal world, the skyscraping realm was at the top level, so there were thousands of Divine Realm experts here. However, the ancient sect, which was a top sect here, would obviously gather more Divine Realm experts. When Xian Yi appeared outside the Sword Palace, the Divine Realm experts who were patrolling here immediately bowed to him and called him Xian Yi Palace Master. Jian Wushuang, your gift in Sword Principle is extremely high. Inside the Sword Palace, lots of Sword Principle experts record their insight. It will be very useful for you. Later, you can come here more often to meditate, Xian Yi said patiently. Yes. Jian Wushuang nodded. Soon, they both stepped on a several-foot-wide flagstone road, which headed towards the front door of the Sword Palace. On the front door, there were 2 grand characters, Sword Palace. Those 2 characters spread powerful sword essence, which covered the whole Sword Palace, and then flew to the sky. Even the numerous layers of space couldn't stop it. Jian Wushuang was stunned. It was the most terrifying sword essence that he had seen. Jian Wushuang looked at Xian Yi and noticed that Xian Yi was unfathomable. He couldn't help suspecting that these 2 characters were written by Xian Yi. Walking along the flagstone road and coming to the front of the Sword Palace, Xian Yi stopped and looked at Jian Wushuang. Little kid, you are so lucky today. one of our vice palace masters is having a lecture. Now, you can go listen. I will just take you up to here. Thanks, Xian Yi Palace Master. Jian Wushuang replied politely. Then he took a deep breath and went into the Sword Palace. Xian Yi was still outside the front door. When he saw Jian Wushuang completely disappear, swoosh, a figure unexpectedly appeared beside him. This person looked exactly the same as Xian Yi. Even the manner and temperament were completely the same. He was also very gentle. The only difference was one was in a purple robe, but one was in a white robe. The people who knew him would know that Xian Yi had cultivated the doppelganger secret skill. Obviously, the one who took part in the Firmament Territory Feast and brought Jian Wushuang and the others back to the ancient sect was his doppelganger. As for the original body, he hadn't gone out at all. He had been staying in the Sword Palace the whole time. The white-robed Xian Yi who just popped up was his original body. You really got a great little kid for me this time. The strongest sword soul. Haha, I haven't met this for a long time. The white-robed Xian Yi smiled gently, and the purple-robed Xian Yi beside him also smiled slightly. The purple-robed Xian Yi was only the doppelganger, so even though he observed Jian Wushuang showing his technique, he still couldn't fully appreciate his strength. But the white-robed Xian Yi, as the original body, without seeing Jian Wushuang's technique, only looked at him once, and then already knew Jian Wushuang had the strongest sword soul. Chapter 658, Sword Palace. Chapter 658, Sword Palace. After stepping inside Sword Palace, Jian Wushuang quickly arrived at a huge martial arts practice field, where there were lots of people seated with their legs crossed. At first glance, there seemed to be hundreds of people. All of them were sitting with their legs crossed, listening silently to the lecture delivered by the young man at the top of the platform. The young man looked rather pale, and his voice sounded somewhat weak, as if he got ill very often. However, such a sickly man himself exuded a sort of frightful sword essence, which could easily destroy Jian Wushuang. It suddenly struck Jian Wushuang that this sickly young man was actually one of the two vice palace masters in Sword Palace, and he was currently giving a lecture. Jian Wushuang immediately found a place to sit down. He dared not make a sound and listened carefully. The vice palace master was telling them some of his experiences related to sword principle, as well as dilemmas people might run across and their solutions. Jian Wushuang grew increasingly fascinated. As time went by, half a day passed in the twinkling of an eye. As his lecture was coming to an end, the vice palace master suddenly stood up and executed a simple move on the platform. The sword swing did not any ups or downs. It was a plain move that left the space it passed through similarly undisturbed. On the surface, the movement of his sword looked like it completely lacked strength. However, as soon as the vice palace master finished, an ear-piercing noise burst from where the longsword chopped, and an unprecedented sword essence surged out from that empty area. Since almost all the people who attended lectures at martial arts practice field were good at exploring sword principle and had high attainment in it, they were all amazed at what they saw, and a few of them were even somewhat inspired. Like Jian Wushuang, he had a remarkable aptitude for sword principle and was currently in the heaven-treading realm. This movement evoked a strong feeling inside of him. Immediately closing his eyes without leaving the martial arts practice field, he began meditating, remaining there for a whole hour before he opened his eyes. Phew! Jian Wushuang relaxed as a smile grew on his face. Speaking of excellent moves, the movement of the vice palace master was no match for the move that Xian Yi used to split Shi Qianhan in two, but the move Xian Yi used was too quick to catch up with, while the movement of this vice palace master, Jian Wushuang, recalled the movement just now. Apparently, this vice palace master had controlled the speed, so that everyone could see it clearly and be truly inspired. People like Jian, Wushuang benefited a lot. Most of the people at martial arts practice field had also benefited a lot. Right then, haha, I figured it out. A voice full of surprise sounded throughout the martial arts practice field. All of the people at martial arts practice field immediately looked at the direction of the sound, and they found a slightly fat, bald teenager who looked simple and honest, laughing out loud. Figured it out. Jian Wushuang frowned. What did you figure out? The bald teenager went straight before the Vice Palace Master while ignoring the stares of everyone around him. Vice Palace Master Nya, I've fully comprehended the first sword scar, the bald teenager said respectfully. Vice Palace Master Nya raised his eyebrows. However, his appearance seemed to cause a stir at martial arts practice field. Everyone looked slightly surprised. The first sword scar? Jian Wushuang was confused. Show us your talent, Vice Palace Master Nya said. Okay. The bald teenager nodded and immediately began to practice his sword at martial arts practice field. Look, it's the first move. The bald teenager quickly displayed his move. The first attack dashed forward, accompanied by a lightning speed sword light that easily penetrated the space in front of him. This is the second sword. The second sword attack was released, leaving behind the impression of a vast and endless void. This is the third sword. When the third sword attack was released, it demonstrated great vigor and even violence. Look, it's the fourth move. The fifth move. The sword attacks continued on, with each move giving off a completely different prospect. The ninth move. The bald teenager spoke again as the ninth move was released, causing the whole area to tremble. After all 9 moves were finished, the bald teenager stopped. Up on the high platform, Vice Palace Master Nya witnessed the swordsmanship of the bald teenager. As soon as the 9 moves were finished, he nodded, smiled, and said, "Not bad. Since you've finished the 9 moves, that means you've comprehended the first sword scar. From now on, you're qualified to attend the Palace Master's lectures at Sword Tower." Thank you, Vice Palace Master Nya. The bald teenager looked surprised. The other sword principal on the drill ground looked at the bald teenager enviously. However, Jian Wushuang grew even more baffled. Since the man just displayed the 9 moves, demonstrating that he's comprehended the first sword scar, he was now eligible to attend lectures delivered by palace masters. Isn't anyone else qualified to go to the sword tower? Jian Wushuang murmured. Before long, the sword principal warriors on the martial arts practice field left along with Vice Palace Master Nya. The bald teenager who just performed the sword move also got up and was about to leave. Hey, senior brother. Jian Wushuang walked towards the bald teenager. The bald teenager frowned when he saw Jian Wushuang. Skyscraping realm? And I haven't seen you before? In the ancient sect, the ordinary disciples were mostly at the level of a divine realm expert, but a few of them were only in the skyscraping realm. Who are you? The bald teenager asked. I'm Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang introduced himself. Jian Wushuang? I haven't heard of you. You must have just joined the ancient sect, right? The bald teenager asked. You're right. Jian Wushuang nodded. No wonder. The bald teenager shrugged. I'm Zhu Lai, an outer disciple. What about you? Are you an outer disciple or? I was lucky enough to gain a place as an inner disciple at Firmament Territory Feast, Jian Wushuang said and smiled. Inner disciple. Zhu Lai paused for a while, and soon a smile grew full of his face. That means your senior brother Jian Wushuang. I pay my respects. Senior brother? Jian Wushuang also paused for a moment, as he had just called Zhu Lai senior brother, but now Zhu Lai was calling him senior brother instead. You don't know about this, senior brother. No matter how long you stay at the ancient sect, only your strength and status matter. Generally, the outer disciple will call the inner disciple's senior brother, said Zhu Lai. That's it. Jian Wushuang didn't know how to react. Chapter 659, 3 Sword Scars. Chapter 659, 3 Sword Scars. I just arrived at the ancient sect, and this is my first time inside the Sword Palace, so I don't know about anything. Would you mind telling me what this is all about? Jian Wushuang asked. Sure, Zhu Lai briskly replied. Actually, the Sword Palace is a place where numerous disciples in the ancient sect explore sword principle. There are 2 vice palace masters and 1 palace master who usually give public lectures at martial arts practice field. Sometimes they even show us their swordsmanship. Today happens to be a day when Vice Palace Master Nya gives his lectures. The Palace Master of Sword Palace, Palace Master Xian Yi, who has a very powerful cultivation in sword principle that has already reached great heights, also occasionally give lectures. However, if you want to attend his lectures, you must meet certain requirements. Senior brother, please follow me. Zhu Lai led Jian Wushuang, and they quickly reached a huge pavilion inside Sword Palace. This is Sword Tower. It's where Palace Master Xian Yi gives lectures, said Zhu Lai. Jian Wushuang looked up at the huge pavilion before him and secretly nodded. Senior brother, look here. Zhu Lai pointed towards a dark stone tablet in front of the pavilion. Jian Wushuang immediately looked at the stone tablet, and his expression changed abruptly. He immediately noticed that there were 3 distinct sword scars on the dark stone tablet. These 3 sword scars were deeply engraved, placed together from top to bottom. Jian Wushuang looked at these 3 sword scars, and his pupils suddenly shrunk. He realized that these 3 sword scars were profoundly delicate. What are the sword scars for? Jian Wushuang asked. I just said that there are some requirements for attending the lectures of Palace Master Xian, and the requirement is related to the 3 sword scars, which were placed here by Palace Master Xian Yi. The rules, which were set by Palace Master Xian Yi, are that only disciples in the ancient sect who can fully comprehend the first sword scar are qualified to attend his lectures in Sword Tower, said Zhu Lai, and anyone who is able to fully comprehend the second sword scar is qualified to be apprenticed to Palace Master Xian Yi as his nominal disciple. If you fully comprehend the third sword scar, you can be his personal disciple. Jian Wushuang's expression turned odd when Zhu Lai said that. As long as I fully comprehend the third sword scar, I can be his personal disciple. Is it difficult? Jian Wushuang asked. It's far more than just difficult. Zhu Lai commented emotionally. I regard myself as being gifted in sword principle. However, it's been more than 10 years since I came to the ancient sect and entered Sword Palace. I've meditated on the 3 sword scars from the very beginning until now, but I've only just now fully comprehended the first sword scar. Isn't it difficult? Also, the first sword scar is the easiest, while the second and third are much harder to meditate on. It's said that just the second sword scar is 10 times harder than the first one. Really? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. It's because of its difficulty that there are less than 20 disciples who are qualified to attend his lectures, and there are only 3 nominal disciples who have fully comprehend the second sword scar and become apprenticed to Palace Master Xian Yi. They have all stayed at Sword Palace for hundreds of years, comprehending the sword scars and attending the lectures of Palace Master Xian Yi. Zhu Lai said, even though I've fully comprehended the first sword scar, I don't know how long it will take me to comprehend the second. After hearing that, Jian Wushuang remained silent for a while, and then asked, since the second sword scar is so difficult, how about the third one? It's even more difficult. Zhu Lai said, anyone who comprehends the third sword scar can be the personal disciple of Palace Master Xian Yi, but apparently, it's not that easy to be his personal disciple with his strength. As far as I know, he still does not have a personal disciple in the ancient sect. Jian Wushuang frowned. In the ancient sect, there were so many disciples, most of who were geniuses of sword principle, but no one among them could meet the requirements set by Palace Master Xian Yi and comprehend the three sword scars. This obviously demonstrated how difficult it was to comprehend the three sword scars. Senior brother, other than Sword Tower, there is one more sword pavilion in Sword Palace where plenty of sword principle experts have left behind their experiences. Some of the experts even created secret skills related to sword principle. You can go and have a look. Besides, I heard that there is also a sword mountain in Sword Palace, but it's just hearsay as I've never been there. Zhu Lai said. I see. Thank you so much, Jian Wushuang replied. You're welcome, senior brother. I'm off now, if you don't mind, Zhu Lai said. Right. Jian Wushuang nodded. Once Zhu Lai left, Jian Wushuang sat down in front of the dark stone tablet. Various sword principle geniuses have been stuck on these three sword scars from Palace Master Xian Yi. Let me see how unique they are. With some expectations, Jian Wushuang began carefully meditating on the three sword scars. Jian Wushuang started by looking over the first of the three sword scars, the one which Zhu Lai had comprehended. Even if the first sword scar was the most common one, Jian Wushuang still felt it was obscure. Jian Wushuang meditated on it carefully after calming himself down. A moment later, he discovered something. This sword scar, Jian Wushuang continued staring at the sword scar as his expression became increasingly grim. Clearly it's just a sword scar, but it contains 9 different sword essences. If these 9 sword essences are separated, you'll get 9 different sword movements. It immediately reminded Jian Wushuang of the 9 sword moves that Zhu Lai had performed in front of Vice Palace Master Nia. Zhu Lai had fully comprehended the first sword scar, which meant he had fully grasped the 9 sword movements included in the sword scar and performed them. It was easy to say, but each of the 9 sword movements was so intriguing that people had to spend a very long time exploring them. It is no wonder that Zhu Lai spent dozens of years to comprehend the 9 sword movements. As there are 9 different sword movements, even I would spend a long time if I meditated on them one by one, Jian Wushuang said silently. At this point, Jian Wushuang looked over the second and third sword scar. Jian Wushuang frowned as he gazed at them. The second and third sword scar look exactly the same as the first sword scar. Jian Wushuang's heart sank. Chapter 660, Numerous Geniuses. Chapter 660, Numerous Geniuses. The 3 sword scars looked exactly the same, and even the 9 sword movements were all the same. However, Jian Wushuang realized that every one of the 3 sword scars had its occult level. The reason why he couldn't figure it out was that he only saw 3 similar sword scars, but the truth was that his cultivation in sword principle was not extensive enough. Palace Master Xian Yi has created a real challenge. There are so many disciples of sword principle in the ancient sect, but it seems true that none of them have been able to fully comprehend the 3 sword scars. I wonder, will I be able to comprehend the 3 sword scars with my talent in sword principle? Jian Wushuang clasped both his hands with a sense of expectation. After scanning the 3 sword scars, Jian Wushuang did not stay here. Instead, he went on a walk around the sword pavilion. In the sword pavilion, he did see a lot of experiences and some secret skills that were left behind by experts of sword principle. However, Jian Wushuang wasn't qualified to directly acquire these experiences and secret skills. If he wanted to meditate on them, he had to send an application to the seniors of the ancient sect. For now, he was nothing more than a disciple, someone who didn't even have the eligibility to send in an application, so he had to be apprenticed to an expert who was able to help him with the application. Palace Master Xian, he was right. All the disciples of the ancient sect become apprenticed to an expert so that they can gain access to more resources. Jian Wushuang pondered, and before long, left the Sword Palace. Back at Enlightenment Mountain, Jian Wushuang found a deserted cave mansion and met Feng and Huang. In front of them, on the stone table, was a good wine that had been brought by Huang from his hometown. Currently, the three people were drinking with each other. When I was still in the ancient world, I used to daydream about what the sects in the eternal world would look like. However, I didn't know what the sects really looked like until I came to the ancient sect. The Dao Palace is amazing, said Huang. It's so amazing to see so many experts gathered there to explore the Dao. Each of the 13 palace masters has an enormously profound understanding of the Dao, and they never hesitate to pass on their experience to others. It's no wonder such a sect can develop such strong disciples, Feng said approvingly. Both of them visited the Dao Palace, where they were shocked by what they saw. There are a good many geniuses in the ancient sect, let alone experts. They all have a profound comprehension of the Dao. Compared to those disciples in the ancient sect, we can only find ourselves at the very bottom of the list. I'm afraid the three of us will lose the qualification to be an inner disciple at the sect competition in 2 years, Huang said. After they heard that, a wry smile played across Feng's lips, while Jian Wushuang gave a shrug. In the ancient sect, only those who have been there for less than 500 years could still be a disciple, but there was still a tremendous number of disciples, even if many of them were outer disciples. However, many outer disciples were more gifted than inner disciples and had an extremely high level of understanding on the Tao. Looking at the outer disciples that were currently in the ancient sect, even the weakest had fully comprehended the first occult, while the slightly stronger disciples had fully comprehended 2 different occults. Gong Chao, who ranked first at Firmament Territory Feast, had only comprehended 2 occults. As for those who stood at the top among the outer disciples, there were more than 10 geniuses that had already grasped 3 different occults. With their current strength, even the strongest one, Jian Wushuang, wouldn't even be ranked in the middle of these outer disciples. Once the sect competition began in 2 years, the weakest inner disciples would be challenged by those outer disciples. If they failed, they would be downgraded to outer disciples, and they would no longer be able to stay at Enlightenment Mountain. We didn't have an appropriate condition for cultivation when we were in the ancient world, so we made little progress. Now that we have arrived at the ancient sect, where we will be provided with so many cultivation resources, we can make much better progress than before. Not to mention that we still have 2 years to put up a good fight. Feng gripped both of his hands tightly, with a wild gleam in his eyes as he continued in a low voice. Even though I may be downgraded to an outer disciple 2 years from now, I won't regret it as long as I know I tried. Exactly. Jian Wushuang nodded and said solemnly, Palace Master Xian, he said the first 2 years in the ancient sect would be the best time to make breakthroughs for disciples like us who just joined the ancient sect, especially inner disciples. As long as we try hard, our strength should be able to reach a brand new level, so we still have a little hope for the sect competition in 2 years. Well, let's toast to the 3 of us still being able to drink at Enlightenment Mountain in 2 years. Huang raised his glass and smiled. Cheers! Both Jian Wushuang and Feng raised their glasses. The 3 of them were selected as candidates to join the ancient sect during the Firmament Territory Feast, and they were all inner disciples, so it was only natural that they stuck together. After drinking a cup of wine, Feng pursed his lips and said, "Since we have just joined the ancient sect, we need to find a suitable expert and become apprenticed to him. Under his personal guidance, and with the many cultivation resources of the ancient sect, our strength should grow by leaps and bounds. Earlier today, I went to Dao Palace and found a suitable expert, so I will go visit him tomorrow. I also have a suitable candidate who is a palace master, but I have no idea whether or not he would be willing to accept me. Anyway, I will have a try," Hua-Ying said and smiled. "Jian Wushuang, what do you think?" Both Feng and Hua-Ying looked at Jian Wushuang. I'm in no hurry. After all, I have not been to the Dao Palace yet," Jian Wushuang said, then smiled briefly. "Your talent is so incredible. I suppose those palace masters and vice palace masters would scramble to accept you as their disciple, so you don't really need to visit them personally," Hua-Ying said with a smile. Jian Wushuang couldn't help laughing. While the three of them were busy drinking together, Xianyi was sending the information on Jian Wushuang, Feng, Hua-Ying, Bingshan, Xianing, and Wu Huang, as well as their performance at the Firmament Territory Feast, to those palace masters and vice palace masters in the Dao Palace. These palace masters and vice palace masters just scanned it briefly. They appeared unimpressed by the first 5 candidates, but when they saw Jian Wushuang's information, they were all astounded. How can he be so powerful with a cultivation age less than 40 years in a place like the ancient world? Even in the eternal world, it's unbelievable to reach that level in less than 40 years, not to mention that he came from the ancient world. What an exceptional genius. Unfortunately, he is good at sword principle and meditates on the world Dao and the slaughter Dao, which are not my strong points. Chapter 661, Rejection. Chapter 661, Rejection. The various palace masters and vice palace masters in the Dao Palace were amazed by Jian Wushuang's talent, and they secretly felt regretful that they weren't good at the Daos that Jian Wushuang meditated on. Of course, there were some that didn't feel that way. Each of the 13 palace masters in the Dao Palace explored different Daos, so there were 2 palace masters, Baiyu and Mo Tao, who were good at the world Dao and the slaughter Dao, respectively. After seeing Jian Wushuang's information, both of these palace masters were a bit interested in him. Jian Wushuang is so talented. If he cultivates well, he'll definitely reach the eternal realm in the future. Although I have many disciples, there are no more than 3 who have a chance of reaching the eternal realm, but their chances of success are extremely low. Compared with Jian Wushuang, those 3 are far behind him in strength. It would really be a shame to miss out on such a genius. Palace Master Baiyu remained silent, as he quickly called upon a disciple under him and commanded, "You go deliver my token to Jian Wushuang and tell him that Baiyu is willing to take him as a disciple. He can come see me if he agrees." Yes, the disciple immediately set out to look for Jian Wushuang. At the same time, a middle-aged man in a black robe, surrounded by an endless killing intent, also appeared at Enlightenment Mountain. Jian Wushuang, a soft voice spread out and entered a specific cave mansion. Jian Wushuang, who had been devoting himself to cultivation inside the cave mansion, woke up with a start and quickly appeared outside the cave mansion. This Jian Wushuang looked at the black-robed middle-aged man as if he was an unparalleled god of death because of the terrifying atmosphere that was almost suffocating. "I am Mo Tao, one of palace masters from the Dao Palace, and I am good at the slaughter Dao," the middle-aged man said. "You're a palace master?" Jian Wushuang was stunned at first, but quickly regained his composure and bowed to him. "Respectful greetings, Palace Master Mo Tao." "Stand up." Jian Wushuang straightened his back when Mo Tao waved at him, and then he got to the point. I've browsed through your information. You're a real talent with an exceptional potential. If you cultivate properly, you'll certainly be one of the top experts in the ancient sect. I'm willing to take you as my apprentice. Are you willing? Personal disciple. It seemed to appeal Jian Wushuang. Not long ago, someone came to give him a token from Baiyu, who also said he intended to accept him as a personal disciple, but now Mo Tao was here in person. You are good at the slaughter Dao, and I currently remain as the foremost in comprehending the slaughter Dao, Mo Tao added. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and immediately said, I'm sorry, Palace Master Mo Tao. I currently have no plans to apprentice to anyone. Mo Tao frowned. Generally speaking, disciples would select an expert to apprentice to right after joining the ancient sect. Jian Wushuang should do the same, but he just said he had no intention to do so. Even though he said it in a tactful way, he had still refused Mo Tao. What a pity! Mo Tao shook his head, but he didn't force him. You should take some time and think about it. After saying this, Mo Tao left. Not long after Mo Tao left, several Vice Palace Masters from the Dao Palace, and even the Vice Palace Masters from the Sword Palace, except Vice Palace Master Nya, visited Jian Wushuang for one purpose, to take him as their apprentice. When Feng and Hua Ying heard about this preferential treatment, they got a bit jealous. It was known to all that both of them wanted to apprentice to a palace master or even a vice palace master, but they had to go through some trials and tribulations first. Yet, these palace masters and vice palace masters took the initiative to come to Jian Wushuang and even battle over him. Surprisingly, however, all these experts who wanted him to become their apprentice were rejected by him, including the palace masters from the Dao Palace like Baiyu and Mo Tao, as well as that vice palace master from the Sword Palace. Jian Wushuang had rejected them all. Jian Wushuang stood there alone, inside the ancient sect, cultivating quietly. During the day, he usually stayed at the Sword Palace, in front of the stone tablet at Sword Tower, meditating on the 3 sword scars. Sometimes he would head to the Dao Palace and listen to lectures delivered by experts who were good at World Dao and Slaughter Dao. In the evening, he returned to Enlightenment Mountain, letting his 2 original bodies separate and meditate quietly. He spent almost every day cultivating and meditating, maintaining a busy schedule. In a flash, 1 month had passed. At the Dao Palace, numerous disciples of the ancient sect sat with their legs crossed at the huge martial arts practice field. At the very front, the strapping Feng, with sword-shaped eyebrows, prostrated himself before a palace master and gave him 3 respectful kowtows. Master, I pay my respects. Feng's voice echoed throughout the entire martial arts practice field. Many of the disciples at the martial arts practice field looked at Feng with envious eyes. He's really persistent. Indeed, he spent a whole month going through trails with an indomitable fighting spirit until he finally managed to become apprenticed to Palace Master Destruction as a personal disciple. The barrier for becoming an apprentice to Palace Master Destruction was very high. He's so lucky to have become one of the personal disciples. Nearly all the disciples of the ancient sect would apprentice to an expert, while most of them would apprentice to those vice palace masters at the level of a superior divine realm expert. There was only a tiny minority who were lucky enough to apprentice to the 13 palace masters, and these disciples were still split into nominal disciples and personal disciples. Nominal disciples existed only in name. Although they could attend the lectures of the palace master and be instructed, the treatment was poorer compared with those personal disciples. In the ancient sect, almost every palace master or vice palace master had plenty of nominal disciples, but the number of personal disciples was small. They would try their best to instruct every personal disciple. The reasons Feng was able to become the personal disciple of Palace Master Destruction were that, on the one hand, he was gifted in the Destruction Tao, and, on the other hand, he had perseverance and determination. So, he was finally accepted. Another month passed. Today, Huang, who had been brought back like Jian, Wushuang, and Feng as an inner disciple, was finally apprenticed to an expert. The one he apprenticed to was also a palace master, but he was somewhat unfortunate. That palace master was only willing to take him as a nominal disciple because his cultivation age was so long that his potential had been exhausted. Even though he was only a nominal disciple, Huang still felt happy about it. In addition, the other three people, Bingshan, Xianing, and Wushuang, were also able to apprentice to an expert within these 2 months. However, these three were only able to apprentice to those vice palace masters as nominal disciples. They would all have to try harder if they wanted to become personal disciples. As of now, 5 out of the 6 people that Xian Yi brought back from Firmament Territory Feast had been apprenticed. Only Jian Wushuang was still cultivating on his own. Chapter 662, Jian Wushuang's Pride. Chapter 662, Jian Wushuang's Pride. There were 13 palace masters and plenty of vice palace masters in the Dao Palace. They would occasionally gather together. Right now, 4 palace masters had gathered in a pavilion to drink. Among them was Feng's master, Palace Master Destruction. Destruction, how's your new personal disciple, Feng? A palace master asked casually. Not bad. Although his talent is only average among my personal disciples, he's perseverant and has a stable foundation. As long as he's taught step by step in the future, he'll be able to make good progress. He's even got a good chance of reaching the eternal realm, Palace Master Destruction said, and laughed. Congratulations! You've accepted another good disciple. Among the 6 men Palace Master Xian Yi brought back from the Firmament Territory Feast, Feng seems to be the best. The others are just ordinary, and that Jian Wushuang. He's too disappointing, a black-clothed lady said, shaking her head slightly. Jian Wushuang. Hearing that, all the palace masters looked at each other speechlessly. 2 months ago, when they heard from Xian Yi that Jian Wushuang had cultivated for less than 40 years and came from the ancient world, they were astonished at Jian Wushuang's talent. Had they been good at the type of Tao which Jian Wushuang mediated on, they would have chosen him as a personal disciple. However, their impression of Jian Wushuang had been ruined to some extent during the past 2 months. He should have had a wonderful prospect. Unfortunately, he's too conceited and proud. The black-clothed lady said, even though he's talented, he came from the ancient world, and his vision is too narrow. He has no idea how to develop himself in the future. What's most important for him now is to look for a good master. With a master's guidance and the cultivation resources in the ancient sect, his talent can be fully developed. It's a pity that he is too arrogant. During the past 2 months, many vice palace masters who are good at world Tao or slaughter Tao have talked with him and wanted to accept him as a disciple. Even Palace Master Baiyu and Mo Tao went to talk to him in person, but all of them were rejected by him. Palace Master Baiyu will master the 9 occults of the world Tao soon. Palace Master Mo Tao's comprehension of the slaughter Tao is beyond anyone in the whole ancient sect. Jian Wushuang should feel lucky to be a disciple of either of them. How could he reject their offer? Does he think that he's so talented that he doesn't need any guidance? Upon hearing this, the other 3 palace master nodded quietly. He's indeed too proud. He's too young. Feng is different. He has cultivated for 1900 years and possesses a persistent and modest personality. I heard that Jian Wushuang often been staying in front of the sword tower over the past 2 months to meditate on the 3 sword scars left by Xian Yi. If I haven't guessed wrong, he does intend to choose a master, but his target is Xian Yi. Palace Master Xian Yi. The black-clothed lady sneered. Xian Yi is indeed strong, but one should choose an appropriate master instead of a strong one. Xian Yi's comprehension of world Tao and slaughter Tao isn't comparable to that of Palace Master Baiyu and Mo Tao. He can teach Jian Wushuang sword principle at most. In addition, is it so easy to be a disciple of Palace Master Xian? The 3 sword scars left by Xian Yi are so enigmatic that no one has been able to fully comprehend them so far. The first 2 sword scars alone are enough to make many sword principle geniuses ponder for hundreds of years. When he fully comprehends the first 2 sword scars, he'll have already missed his best stage of growth. The loss outweighs the gain. If I were him, I would definitely choose to be a disciple of Palace Master Baiyu or Mo Tao. Then I would take my time to meditate on the 3 sword scars and try to be a disciple of Palace Master Xian Yi. After all, in ancient Sect, it's acceptable for a genius to be a disciple of 2 or more experts. Other palace masters nodded their assent. Who knows what he's thinking? Every genius is proud. Just wait. When the Sect competition starts in 2 years, he certainly won't be able to keep his position as an inner disciple. The competition among the outer disciples is more intense. After he suffers some setbacks and learns some lessons, he'll naturally understand how foolish his choice was, and then he'll find a way to make amends. Ah, what a pity! After all, he's still a peerless genius. Lots of disciples who were good at sword principle had gathered in the sword palace. When Jian Wushuang showed up, he immediately received many strange stares. It has already been 2 months. Hasn't Jian Wushuang chosen a master yet? Hey, he's really stupid. Does he think he can be so disdainful because of his talent? Without guidance from experts, he will have to cultivate by himself. Humph, wait and see. He'll learn a lesson in the Sect competition 2 years from now. Many disciples lowered their voices while talking about him, but Jian Wushuang could still hear some of their voices clearly. However, he did not pay attention to these discussions and went directly to the sword tower. He quickly arrived at the stone tablet with the 3 sword scars on it. Sitting down in front of the stone tablet, Jian Wushuang sighed in relief and slowly calmed down. 2 months have passed. Feng, Huaing, and even Bingshan, Xianing, and Wu Huang have chosen their masters. I'm still cultivating alone without guidance from any experts. It's no wonder these disciples in the ancient Sect are gossiping about me in private. I'm afraid that lots of people are saying I'm conceited, Jian Wushuang thought with a smile. He did not care about these things, though. They aren't me and don't know what I've been through. How can they know what I'm thinking? Jian Wushuang thought. He had made his decision the moment he entered the ancient Sect and saw the 3 sword scars on the stone tablet. He would definitely choose a master. A master's guidance would help him improve faster. However, he had never had a master since the day he was born. Perhaps the super expert who created the heavenly creation skill could barely be counted as his master, but he had never really kowtowed to any master. Therefore, he would not choose his first master easily. His master should be able to guide his cultivation, and more importantly, his personality and strength had to make Jian Wushuang genuinely admire him. In the whole ancient Sect, only one man was qualified, and that person was the Palace Master of Sword Palace, Xian Yi. Chapter 663, Comprehension. Chapter 663, Comprehension. In the eternal world, a man could have 2, 3, or even more masters. The more masters the better, as long as his masters could help him with his cultivation. But Jian Wushuang was different. He came from the ancient world, where a warrior usually had only one master or two masters at most. The relationship between the master and disciple was very important. After all, as a warrior's strength grew stronger and stronger, many of his relatives and friends would gradually grow old and die. The ones who could still accompany him were usually his disciples or masters. Therefore, he would not choose a master easily. Both Palace Master Baiyu and Mo Tao have extremely high comprehension of the Tao, and they're definitely qualified to be my masters. However, I have no knowledge of their personalities. Jian Wushuang shook his head while pondering. In the whole ancient sect, the only person he admired both in strength and personality was Xian Yi. Therefore, the only master he wanted to accept was Xian Yi. He did not care if other people thought he was arrogant or conceited. As for the condition to become Xian Yi's disciple, it might be impossible for other people to completely comprehend the 3 sword scars, but not for Jian Wushuang. He possessed the strongest sword soul and heaven-defying talent in sword principle. In addition, he had reached the heaven-treading realm, which meant his comprehension ability was currently at its highest. He was sure that he could fully comprehend the 3 sword scars. The first sword scar contains 9 sword movements, while the second one looks identical with the first one, but it actually contains 3 sword movements that originate from those 9 sword movements. The 3 sword scars were extremely enigmatic. The 9 sword movements in the first sword scar alone were extremely profound. For example, Zhu Lai, who had a certain level of talent in sword principle, still spent more than 10 years on the first sword scar before he fully comprehended the 9 sword movements. However, no one knew that Jian Wushuang had fully comprehended them in 2 months. Jian Wushuang had thoroughly comprehended the first sword scar. It took Zhu Lai more than 10 years to do it, but Jian Wushuang succeeded in only 2 months. He had already started meditating on the second sword scar. Jian Wushuang insisted on his belief and goal, continuing to cultivate while relying on his strongest sword soul and supreme talent that had been endowed to him by the heaven-treading realm and the heavenly creation skill. Time flew. No matter what the disciples in the ancient sect said about him, Jian Wushuang still cultivated and meditated alone. Half a year had elapsed since Jian Wushuang first entered the ancient sect. In front of the dark stone tablet at the sword tower, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes, which were sparkling with surprise. I finally succeeded. In the past 6 months, he had spent most of his time meditating in front of the sword tower. 4 months ago, he had already fully comprehended the first sword scar. The second sword scar should be far more difficult to comprehend than the first one for ordinary experts. But Jian Wushuang had reached the heaven-treading realm and had a terrifying level of talent in comprehension. 4 months. 4 months after Jian Wushuang fully comprehended the first sword scar, he had also completely comprehended the second one. Palace Master Xian Yi will give a lecture in the Sword Tower 2 days from now. It's a good time for me to have finished comprehending the second sword scar. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly, and then turned to inspect the third sword scar. The last sword scar. This sword scar, Jian Wushuang frowned slightly. He thought the 3 sword scars were exactly the same half a year ago. However, after he comprehended the first one, he felt the second and third were different. The second sword scar contained 3 sword movements that originated from the 9 movements in the first one. The third sword scar contained 1 sword movement, which was the integration of the 9 sword movements. So, naturally, the third sword scar was the most difficult. It took me half a year to fully comprehend the first and second sword scar. I wonder how long it'll take me to comprehend the third one. Jian Wushuang thought, and then continued to meditate. The next day, a woman with sky-blue hair and a beautiful face was sitting on the highest platform in the huge martial arts practice field of the Sword Palace. Many disciples from the Sword Palace had gathered around her and were listening carefully to her lecture. This absolute beauty was the second Vice Palace Master of Sword Palace, Ling Yu. When Jian Wushuang first came to the ancient sect half a year ago, Ling Yu also expressed her wish to accept Jian Wushuang as her personal disciple, but she was rejected by Jian Wushuang. Ling Yu quickly finished her lecture and was about to leave when Jian Wushuang stood up. Vice Palace Master, Jian Wushuang appeared in front of Ling Yu and bowed slightly. Jian Wushuang. Ling Yu glanced at him, her beautiful eyebrows slightly raising. She had been shocked by Jian Wushuang's talent. However, Jian Wushuang had not chosen a master from the ancient sect even now, so he had been pegged as being proud and conceited. Many experts, including her, were disappointed with him. If Jian Wushuang had chosen me, Palace Master Baiyu, or Palace Master Mo Tao as his master, he would have already reached a new level. Nevertheless, he chose to cultivate by himself. It's unlikely that he'll make great progress during this period of time. It can be said that he wasted half a year, Ling Yu thought, shaking her head slightly. Although it was a pity, she would not force him to change his mind. Everyone had to make their own choices and follow their own path in life. Since Jian Wushuang chose to refuse the offer of her and the other experts, they would not insist no matter how talented he was. Jian Wushuang, what can I do for you? Ling Yu asked. Well, I've been meditating on the 3 sword scars left by Palace Master Xian Yi, and I had some comprehensions yesterday, Jian Wushuang said. Oh. Ling Yu raised her eyebrows. The Sword Palace disciples on the martial arts practice field turned to Jian Wushuang in surprise. Some comprehensions. Has he fully comprehended the first sword scar in just half a year? Impossible. The 3 sword scars left by Palace Master Xian Yi are so enigmatic. Even the 9 sword movements contained in the first sword scar are so profound. Even though Jian Wushuang has an extremely high gift in sword principle, it's impossible for him to fully comprehend the first sword scar in half a year. I've been meditating on the first sword scar for nearly 20 years and have only just mastered the 7th sword movement. Did he expect to comprehend the 9 sword movements in half a year? He must be joking. Chapter 664, 3 Sword Movements. Chapter 664, 3 Sword Movements. All the Sword Palace disciples here knew how enigmatic the 3 sword scars left by Palace Master Xian Yi were. In their view, it was not possible to fully understand the first sword scar in only half a year. Even Ling Yu was a little surprised, but she still said, "Display it to us." Yes, Jian Wushuang nodded his head. As he turned over his palm, the heart-killing sword appeared in his hand. The disciples surrounding Jian Wushuang immediately stepped backward. Without much preparation, Jian Wushuang just took a deep breath and then started. He waved his sword and began executing the 3 sword movements. The first sword stroke was a straight stab, and the blade possessed an unprecedented sharpness that seemed to tear through everything. As it swept through the space in front of him, the air began to hum softly. The second sword stroke was a harsh chop. Endless power was accumulated at a point and then burst out in an instant, giving off the impression that it was invincible and could destroy anything. Then he released a sword slash. This stroke was extremely dazzling and seemed to contain a special magic power. Even Vice Palace Master Ling, you could not help being attracted when by the slashing movement of this long sword. He displayed the 3 sword strokes, one after the other, without pause. Then he stopped. The whole martial arts practice field fell into complete silence. the sword principal disciples were endlessly shocked. Some were stunned while others were full of doubts and had a hint of ridicule written on their faces. Just 3 sword movements, as expected. The first sword scar contains 9 sword movements, but he only displays 3. His sword movements looked strong, but he's still far from fully mastering the 9 sword movements. A disciple who had a shallow comprehension of the first sword scar said sarcastically, just as he finished speaking. "Shut up!" Zhu Lai, who stood next to the disciple, scolded him in a low voice. "You idiot! Don't speak nonsense when you don't understand." "What do you mean?" The disciple was confused, but he quickly realized that other disciples, as well as Vice Palace Master Lingyu, were staring at Jian Wushuang in astonishment. The next moment, the audience burst out in an uproar. 3 sword movements. They're the 3 sword movements from the second sword scar. How is that possible? The disciples who had some knowledge of the 3 sword scars were stunned. Even Vice Palace Master Lingyu was full of unprecedented shock. Just now, they had doubted whether Jian Wushuang could display the 9 sword movements contained in the first sword scar, but Jian Wushuang had only displayed 3 sword movements, but they originated from the integration of the 9 sword movements. That was to say, not only had Jian Wushuang fully comprehended the first sword scar, he had also comprehended the second one. Just half a year. He had comprehended the first and second sword scar in just half a year. God! Among the crowd, Zhu Lai opened his eyes wide and stared at Jian Wushuang. "I've been meditating on the 3 sword scars this whole time. It took me over 10 years to fully comprehend the first one, but it's too difficult to integrate the 9 sword movements into 3 movements. It will take me at least dozens of years or hundreds of years. Jian Wushuang, senior brother Wushuang, has he fully comprehended the first and second sword scar in just half a year?" Zhu Lai was in a complete daze. "Vice Palace Master Lingyu, have I reached the requirements?" Jian Wushuang looked up at Lingyu, who was standing on the high platform. "Lingyu finally recovered from the shock." She glanced at Jian Wushuang in horror and immediately nodded. "Palace Master has said that those who comprehend the first sword scar are qualified to listen to his lecture in the Sword Tower. Those who comprehend the second one can be his nominal disciple. Since you've completely comprehended the second sword scar, you can be his disciple now. I'll send a message to Palace Master Xian Yi right now." "Thank you," Jian Wushuang said. Lingyu took a deep breath and then took out a messaging slip. "Palace Master Xian Yi," Lingyu had just begun to talk. "I already know. I'll be lecturing in the Sword Tower tomorrow. Tell him to come." Xian Yi had already responded. "I see." Lingyu turned to Jian Wushuang and said, "Palace Master Xian Yi has replied. He said for you to go to the Sword Tower and attend his lecture tomorrow. He'll have some arrangements for you." Jian Wushuang nodded, and then left the Sword Palace without paying any attention to the awe and admiration in the gazes of the disciples around him. He headed directly towards Enlightenment Mountain. However, at the moment, in the sky above the Sword Palace, a man was standing quietly, his eyes gazing through the endless void at Jian Wushuang, who was walking slowly toward Enlightenment Mountain. In just half a year, he has completely comprehended the second sword scar. He really is the owner of the strongest sword soul. The white-robed Xian Yi stood there with his hands behind his back and a gentle smile on his face. Sword soul was determined by the person's talent in sword principle. The stronger the sword soul was, the higher their gift in sword principle was. The strongest sword soul meant that Jian Wushuang's talent for sword principle was matchless in the world. So it was only natural that it was not difficult for a genius with such an amazing talent in sword principle to fully comprehend his sword scars. This boy is good at sword principle, possesses the strongest sword soul, and he has long since decided to choose me as his master. The moment he entered the ancient sect, he already understood himself and had chosen his path. Even if many of the experts in the ancient sect think his choice is wrong, as long as he thinks it's right, he'll persist. No matter how others think of him, he insists on his own choice. He may look stupid and stubborn. However, such a person has real willpower. What's more, he has the strongest sword soul, so he has a good reason to be so confident. Everyone thought that it would take him a long time to comprehend the 3 sword scars, but it only took him half a year to fully comprehend 2 of them. He's very confident, and I like his confidence. It seems like I'll have another disciple soon. Xian murmured to himself, but the smile on his face showed that he was very satisfied with Jian Wushuang. He brought Jian Wushuang, Feng, and Huaing back from the Firmament Territory feast. He had watched their growth in the ancient sect during the past half year. Even though Jian Wushuang was thought to be wasting his talent in the eyes of the numerous experts in the ancient sect, Xian did not show up and try to persuade him to change his mind. He wanted to see whether Jian Wushuang could persist with his own choice and not be affected by others. It had been proven that the choice Jian Wushuang made was right. Chapter 665. Acknowledging Xian Yi as Master. Chapter 665. Acknowledging Xian Yi as Master. On that same day, the news that Jian Wushuang had completely comprehended the first and second sword scars left by Palace Master Xian Yi spread through the whole ancient sect. Those who had thought Jian Wushuang was too proud and conceited were immediately dumbfounded. They never dreamed that Jian Wushuang's gift in sword principle would be so high. Recalling Jian Wushuang's behavior in the past half year, no one dared to say that he was conceited anymore. There was a thin line between confidence and conceit. If Jian Wushuang did not succeed in half a year, or if his future performance was mediocre, it could be said that he was conceited, but now Jian Wushuang had given those people a severe slap in the face. Jian Wushuang had absolute confidence in his own choice. Since he had comprehended the second sword scar in just half a year, who could guarantee that he would not comprehend the third one in the future? Once he comprehended it, he would be the personal disciple of Palace Master Xian Yi and would definitely have limitless prospects with Xian Yi's personal guidance. Palace Master Xian Yi. Many disciples in the ancient sect were jealous of Jian Wushuang. Palace Master Xian Yi had a very supreme and special position in the ancient sect. One of the important reasons that the ancient sect as a top sect was able to surpass the 3 magnates to some extent was the existence of Palace Master Xian Yi. Many experts in the ancient sect were proficient in various weapon daos, but only Palace Master Xian Yi was able to establish Sword Palace. Everyone in the ancient sect knew about the strength and mystery of Palace Master Xian Yi. They all dreamed of being his disciple, but the requirement was too harsh. The experts who knew that Jian Wushuang wanted to be the disciple of Palace Master Xian Yi looked down on his choice, as Xian Yi's condition was too harsh, and it would take a long time for Jian Wushuang to achieve it. But now, in only half a year, Jian Wushuang had become Xian Yi's nominal disciple. His achievement filled people with envy and admiration. The next day, Sword Tower opened. Since Palace Master Xian Yi would be giving a lecture in person, all the sword principal disciples who had completely comprehended the first sword scar went to the Sword Tower. Inside the Sword Tower, over 20 sword principal disciples sat cross-legged in the open space. Naturally, Jian Wushuang was among them. Before long, a white-robed Xian Yi appeared at the top of the Sword Tower. Everyone immediately quieted down. Xian Yi looked around at all the people below and nodded slightly, then directly started teaching. Swords are predominantly for killing. You can use the sword tip to stab, the sword edge to chop, the sword back to block, and the sword blade to slash. It can be said that the sword is a moderate weapon, as it can be used to attack and defend. It's comprehensive and balanced. Sword principle is the way of killing, broad and profound. Sword soul is just the beginning of sword principle. Awakening the sword soul means that you're qualified to meditate on sword principle. That's as to say, no matter how strong your sword soul is, you still have not mastered sword principle. The real sword principle is based on the sword heart. Sword heart. Jian Wushuang was listening carefully. The explanation on sword principle by Xuan was completely different from that of Vice Palace Master Nia and Lin Yu. The sword principle explained by Palace Master Xuan was a process from simplicity to complexity, like a tree that gradually evolved from a common seedling to a towering tree. It was very profound and complicated. Jian Wushuang and other disciples present could not fully understand all the things being explained by Xuan, but the part which they understood benefited them greatly. Every word from the mouth of Palace Master Xuan seemed to contain special magic and directly explained the essence of sword principle. Currently, inside Sword Tower, every disciple was fascinated by his words, including Jian Wushuang. Palace Master Xuan kept teaching for one whole day and night. The greatest sword principle starts from simplicity, then strives for complexity, but eventually returns to simplicity. When he reached this point, Xuan finally stopped. Most of the disciples who attended the lecture below had fallen into meditation. It was only after a while that they finally recovered themselves. Their faces were full of pleasure and regret. They were pleased because Xuan had talked directly about the essence of sword principle, which benefited them a lot. They had also learned many things which they had never thought of before. It was much better than what Vice Palace Master Nia and Lin Yu taught them. They felt regret because Palace Master Xuan rarely gave lectures. He usually only gave a lecture once a year, or sometimes even once every few years. The opportunity was too rare. Jian Wushuang. Palace Master Xuan looked down. Jian Wushuang had just woken up from the meditation when he heard Palace Master Xuan call his name. He immediately stood up and stepped forward. Palace Master Xuan Jian Wushuang greeted him with a hint of humility. When I left the 3 sword scars outside of the sword tower, I set some rules. Since you've completely comprehended the 2nd sword scar, you're my nominal disciple from now on, Palace Master Xuan said. Disciple Jian Wushuang pays respects to Master. Jian Wushuang immediately knelt down in front of Xuan and respectfully kowtowed 3 times. Rise. Xuan waved his hand. Jian Wushuang stood up immediately. Follow me. The rest of the people can leave, Xuan said. The disciples inside Sword Tower immediately dispersed one after another, while Jian Wushuang followed Xuan to the 2nd floor of the Sword Tower. Jian Wushuang sat face to face with Xuan at a long table as Xuan looked at him with a gentle smile on his face. When you began to study the 3 sword scars, I knew I would have a new disciple. But I never expected it to be so soon. Xuan smiled. In the ancient sect, and even the entire firmament territory, only you can comprehend the 2nd sword scar in half a year as you possess the strongest sword soul. Jian Wushuang was shocked by his words. Master, you knew? Jian Wushuang was surprised. After he came to the eternal world, he had never exposed his strongest sword soul in front of people. Even at the Firmament Territory Feast, he only exerted 80% of his sword soul power when he fought with Gong Chao because he did not want people to find out about his strongest sword soul. He had thought that he hid it well. He never expected that Palace Master Xian Yi had discovered the existence of his strongest sword soul long ago. The moment I saw you, my sword heart was provoked, so I immediately knew that your sword soul was extraordinary, Xian Yi explained with a smile. At that time, only my doppelganger went to the Firmament Territory feast, so I was not sure whether you owned the strongest sword soul. However, when you arrived at the ancient sect and my original body saw you, I became certain that you indeed possess the strongest sword soul, which make all sword principle warriors envious. Chapter 666, Nine-World Picture, Slaughter Book, and Tao Origin Fruit. Chapter 666, Nine-World Picture, Slaughter Book, and Tao Origin Fruit. Make all sword principle warriors envious. Jian Wushuang smiled silently and then nodded his assent. Sword Soul determined one's gift in sword principle. Jian Wushuang's strongest sword soul represented that he had the strongest gift in sword principle, which was sufficient to fill any sword principle warrior with envy and admiration. Even though you're just my nominal disciple, I'll try my best to guide you. Xian Yi looked at Jian Wushuang and asked, in the past half year, you spent most of your energy meditating on the 3 sword scars. But I guess you've also improved your comprehension of the Tao, right? I did improve it to some extent. Jian Wushuang nodded and said, I've been comprehending the world Tao and slaughter Tao simultaneously. I've fully comprehended the second occult of the world Tao and have a basic understanding of the third occult. I also comprehended the second occult of the slaughter Tao a few days ago. Half a year. In the past half year, Jian Wushuang stayed in the sword tower to meditate on the sword scars in the daytime and returned to Enlightenment Mountain to comprehend the Tao at night. His comprehension of the Tao while at Enlightenment Mountain was 3 times quicker than it would be outside. With the talent endowed by the heaven-treading realm, his 2 original bodies had made amazing progress in just half a year. For example, after Feng became the disciple of Palace Master Destruction, he received personal guidance from Palace Master Destruction and some cultivation resources which Palace Master Destruction acquired for him. However, he had only comprehended the second occult of the Destruction Tao, which was slower than Jian Wushuang. Without any instruction and cultivation resources, it's very impressive for you to have made such progress with only the use of Enlightenment Mountain in the past half year. Xian Yi nodded slightly and then said solemnly, I'm not proficient in the world Tao or the slaughter Tao. I can't compare with Palace Master Bayu and Mo Tao in terms of comprehension on these 2 Taos. Nevertheless, my vision is far broader than them. There are many resources in the ancient sect that could be of great help to your cultivation, but very few of them actually suit you. I'll apply for a batch of cultivation resources for you according to your actual situation. Go back to Enlightenment Mountain and wait. I'll have those resources delivered to you soon. Thank you, Master. Jian Wushuang expressed his gratitude. Go back and continue your cultivation. Don't disgrace me in the sect competition which is being held 1.5 years from now. Xian Yi said. Yes, Jian Wushuang nodded solemnly and left. Xian Yi sat alone in the sword tower. He thought, this little boy is extremely talented. He's reached this level in the world Tao and slaughter Tao while comprehending sword principle. Among the treasures which are suitable for him, which ones should I choose? He began to select resources for Jian Wushuang. As he said, he might not have the same understanding towards the world Tao and slaughter Tao as Palace Masters Bayu and Mo Tao did, but his vision was extremely broad. He knew which treasures were useful and beneficial for Jian Wushuang, as well as which ones were a waste. He quickly made up his mind. The 9-world picture, which dissects the 9 occults of the world Tao into various world essences, is the most suitable resource for this little boy to comprehend the world Tao. In terms of slaughter Tao, the slaughter book left by Zhuoming should be sufficient. As for sword principle, he has a deep comprehension of sword principle now. If he wants to go further, he has to condense his sword heart. It's too difficult, so it's impossible for him in a short period of time. He doesn't need any resources for the cultivation of sword principle right now. Listening to the lectures or meditating on the third sword scar is enough for him. I'll give him a Tao origin fruit. That will be sufficient for him to keep cultivating for a while. Not long after Jian Wushuang returned to Enlightenment Mountain, he received the cultivation resources, which Xian Yi acquired for him. 9-world picture, slaughter book, and a Tao origin fruit. He was shocked at the cultivation resources. They were all useful for his comprehension of the Tao. The 9-world picture and slaughter book were used to assist his cultivation in the world Tao and slaughter Tao. As for the Tao origin fruit, Jian Wushuang was no stranger to the Tao origin fruit. During the Firmament Territory Feast, the first prize of the third round arena battle was 1 million divine gems, and, more importantly, a Tao origin fruit. It was a precious treasure, which could help in comprehending the Tao. Even in a top sect like the ancient sect, where there were numerous Tao origin fruits, they were still highly valued. Jian Wushuang was allocated a Tao origin fruit because of Xian Yi and his own amazing talent, especially the fact that he comprehended 2 of the sword scars within half a year had shocked the whole ancient sect, so the high officials agreed to give him a Tao origin fruit after discussing it. Under normal circumstances, even personal disciples of palace masters could not receive a Tao origin fruit if they had not shown amazing talent. As for the 9-world picture and slaughter book, the slaughter book was the record of the slaughter Tao comprehension experiences of an eternal realm expert named Zhuoming, who had completely comprehended the 9 occults of the slaughter Tao. Each of the 101 words in the slaughter book contained concepts related to the occults of the slaughter Tao. Jian Wushuang could comprehend the slaughter Tao by reading each word in the book. The slaughter book is similar to the 6-story pagoda that was given to me by Elder Di Jing. The 6-story pagoda is more complicated and involves a wider range. The slaughter book is simpler, but every word is extremely profound, Jian Wushuang thought with a surprised smile on his face. He already had the 6-story pagoda to help him comprehend the slaughter Tao. Now, he also had the slaughter book, which would make his comprehension even easier. As for the 9-world picture, the 9-world picture was even more wonderful. It contained 9 pictures: a flower, a tuft of grass, a stone, a tree, a lake, a mountain, a piece of cloud, a drop of water, and a person. They all seemed to be simple and ordinary. However, after careful observation, Jian Wushuang discovered that each picture was a complete world. 9 pictures that were equal to 9 complete worlds and were full of concepts on the occults. Chapter 667, 2 years. Chapter 667, 2 years. The 9-world picture consists of 9 paintings in total, and each of them represents an occult of the world Tao. Among the paintings, I've comprehended the occults of the 2 with a flower and a leaf drawn on it. I'll need to work on the remaining 7. Jian Wushuang thought to himself as he hung the remaining 7 paintings on the wall. He then sat down with his legs crossed and began to observe the 3rd painting, on which there was only a pebble. However, as he continued to stare at it, he discovered that the pebble was, in fact, a small world containing many laws of the universe and the nature of the world Tao. What he needed to do was to comprehend those laws and nature. It's wonderful. Jian Wushuang brightened up at the thought of how much faster he could comprehend the world Tao now with those paintings as reference. Now, I have the paintings to help me comprehend the world Tao. The 6-story pagoda and slaughter book will help me comprehend the slaughter Tao. I also have Enlightenment Mountain and a Tao origin fruit at hand. I'm like a fish in the sea. His eyes flickered. Master has tried his best to acquire sufficient resources for my cultivation, so I can't slack off in the remaining year and a half before the sect competition begins. I really want to see how much progress I can make in this period of time. He swallowed the Tao origin fruit on that same day and started cultivating with the resources he had been given. Since then, he had spent most his days in the Enlightenment Mountain meditating. Sometimes he would go to the Sword Palace or the Tao Palace and listen to the lectures, and he never missed one of Xian Yi's lectures. If he was confused about something, he would ask his master for help. The arrival of winter signaled that 2 years had elapsed since Jian Wushuang first entered ancient sect. One day, he was sitting down on a peak, which towered up into the clouds, with the white-robed Xian Yi beside him. Master, I can feel that I've reached the threshold in sword principle, so why do I kept failing to condense even one trace of sword heart? Jian Wushuang asked Xian Yi with a frown. Because your heart is not really at peace. Xian Yi smiled at him. The most important aspect of sword heart is the sword, but you can't leave out the heart. Your success will depend on both, so calm down and let it be. Understood. Jian Wushuang nodded. The sect competition will begin tomorrow. Are you ready for it? Xian Yi added while looking at him. Yes. Jian Wushuang gave him a smile. In fact, he had nothing he needed to prepare in advance. His power was all that he would rely on in this competition. You look confident. I shall await your success. Xian Yi grinned and continued. Show us your power as much as you can. Only in this way can I help you acquire more resources. I will. Jian Wushuang nodded. Then go. Xian Yi waved his hand. Jian Wushuang bowed to him and left. Watching Jian Wushuang's back, Xian Yi had an inscrutable smile on his face. He has better perception than anyone I've met. He really is incredibly gifted. Not long after Jian Wushuang came back to Enlightenment Mountain, Huang presented himself at his door. Jian Wushuang, have you heard that Feng managed to break into the 6th level of the Tao Tower today? After taking a seat at a table, Huang spoke seriously to Jian Wushuang. Really? Jian Wushuang was surprised. Tao Tower was a place used to test the disciples' comprehension in the Tao. He heard that 3 were 13 levels in total, and the better one's comprehension in the Tao, the further he could go in the tower. When Jian Wushuang had just entered the ancient sect and possessed a little comprehension in the Tao, he had once taken the test in the tower as well. However, at that time, he was only able to make it to level 3. It's very difficult for a disciple who has comprehended the 3rd occult to make it to level 6, but Feng did it. He must have comprehended the 3rd, and maybe even the 4th occult. He has made a lot of progress in these 2 years. Jian Wushuang was lost in thought for some time before replying to Huang. Feng is indeed talented. He is more than just talented. Huang echoed his words. His master has said that he is well-grounded and only lacking resources, which is why he had cultivated slowly when he was in the ancient world. However, now that he has entered the ancient sect, he has progressed faster and faster while depending on his previous accumulations. In these 2 years, his power has skyrocketed. Now, everyone in our sect has learned of his power. Surely, he will be able to keep his place in Enlightenment Mountain during the sect competition tomorrow. I agree. Jian Wushuang nodded. It was clear to him and everyone else in the sect that Feng could keep his place as an inner disciple in tomorrow's competition. As for the other competitors, few of them had made it to the 4th occult, and therefore could not be his match. Alas, I really envy him. Huang looked worried as he continued speaking. As for me, I've only comprehended the second occult, and can only be ranked in the middle among all the outer disciples. I'm afraid I will no longer be an inner disciple after tomorrow, and won't be able to return to Enlightenment Mountain for a long time. He looked toward Jian Wushuang and continued, Jian Wushuang, with Xian Yi as your master over the last 2 years, I reckon you've progressed no less than Feng has. Are you sure that you can survive tomorrow's competition? Well, not quite. Jian Wushuang thought he should be humble. Not quite. Huang shot him an odd glance, but continued, Anyway, it's better than having no chance. You're not like me. I know I'll be removed from the list of inner disciples tomorrow. Jian Wushuang could not find any words to reply with, so he sighed in secret. Huang was the weakest one among the 6 from the ancient world. Relying on the resources in the ancient sect, he had progressed a lot, but he was still far from being Feng's match. Chapter 668, The Competition Begins. Chapter 668, The Competition Begins. In fact, Jian Wushuang did have some confidence in tomorrow's sect competition. The heavenly creation skill is amazingly helpful. I have been able to cultivate 10 times faster than before since I reached the heaven-treading realm. This has been the most efficient period of my life so far. At my current level, I can roll through Feng and the other disciples. Jian Wushuang thought to himself, with Xian Yi as his master, possessing treasures like the 9-world picture, slaughter book, and a Tao origin fruit, all of this contributed to his making achievements that were beyond belief at the time. Not to mention that he also had 2 original bodies cultivating separately at Enlightenment Mountain. He was confident that he could defeat Feng and the other disciples in the competition. It all depends on tomorrow. A light of firmness flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes as he clenched his hands. The next day, the 10-year sect competition began. The whole sect was bustling with people. This competition was the only way that outer disciples could become inner disciples, so they valued this chance very much. They were dying for the opportunity to cultivate at Enlightenment Mountain like the inner disciples because it meant they could cultivate 3 times faster than in other places. The rules for the competition were quite simple. The top 10 outer disciples and the 10 weakest from among the inner disciples would fight each other for the 10 empty positions to be inner disciples. At first light, the fight among the outer disciples began, and the list of the top 10 was released at noon. As for their opponents, the masters directly appointed 10 inner disciples to fight against them, including Jian Wushuang, Feng, and Huang, at one of the sect's large martial arts practice fields, which was used to hold competitions. The 10 outer disciples and 10 inner disciples stood at the center of the field, surrounded by many other disciples who desired to watch the battles. 10 outer disciples and 10 inner disciples. Jian Wushuang looked around and saw many new faces. He had spent the last 2 years cultivating alone, so he had little contacts with others. Nevertheless, he had heard some things about them from his talks with Feng and Huang. Overall, the outer disciples were powerful, and some of them had comprehended up to the 3rd occult. Jian Wushuang believed the top 10 must have at least reached that level. While looking around, he noticed a bronze-skinned burly man with a fierce aura. The man was called Luo Yong, and he was recognized as the number 1 among all the outer disciples. Rumors had it that he had comprehended the 5th occult. Besides that man, there was a white-clothed woman who also caught many eyes. She was named Donger. Even though she was regarded as being the weakest among the inner disciples, she was, in fact, very powerful and had comprehended the 5th occult. There seemed to be a very good chance that those 2 would win a place as inner disciples. The same was true for Feng. Apart from them, there were several other geniuses who might succeed in the competition as well. As for the rest of them, it remained to be seen. Jian Wushuang was among the rest. This was because he had been immersed in cultivating and had not battled against the others over the years or adventured in the Dao Tower. No one knew how strong he really was. The competition is about to start, but how will it start? The onlookers discussed in confusion. Generally, the sect competition would be decided by many rounds of fighting, but it wasn't the same every year. Right then, a stunning figure appeared on the field. It was no other than the Vice Master of Sword Palace, Lingyu, Jian Wushuang's acquaintance. She was the hostess of the competition. As soon as she landed on the field, she crushed a token and a huge wormhole immediately appeared before everyone's eyes. Her voice then echoed. This time, the Sect competition will be held inside the Ninth Heaven Road. The words caused an uproar among the audience. Ninth Heaven Road. This is beyond my expectation. Those competitors have a lot suffering ahead of them as they walk through those 31 floors. Ninth Heaven Road is a separate space, so we won't be able to see their performance, only their final results. What a pity! The onlookers sighed. Jian Wushuang had heard of the Ninth Heaven Road before. It had 31 floors in total, with an obstacle on each floor. The more powerful one was, the higher he could reach. The Ninth Heaven Road had been used several times before during the Sect competition, and it had been proven that it could test the disciples' power by having all 20 disciples climb the floors together. Jian Wushuang, you must have progressed a lot, right? Feng suddenly looked toward Jian Wushuang and asked. Jian Wushuang seemed surprised by this question. Just a bit. Well, let's see who can go further in this competition, Feng added. Okay. Jian Wushuang nodded with a smile. Chapter 669, Ninth Heaven Road. Chapter 669, Ninth Heaven Road. This wormhole leads to the Ninth Heaven Road. Go ahead and enter, Lingyu said to the 20 competitors. The competitors immediately entered the wormhole without hesitation. The moment Jian Wushuang entered it, he found himself in front of a towering mountain. The mountain looked like it had been thrust into the clouds, with no end in sight and only a long path leading to its peak. While staring at the path in front of him, he spotted several figures standing a short distance away, but they had no signs of life. The 10 figures were black-armored puppet fighters, each armed with a long black spear, and they appeared to be guarding the path forward. After glancing at them, Jian Wushuang began to walk forward along the path. However, the moment his foot touched the first floor, the 10 puppet fighters all opened their eyes and stared at him emotionlessly. The next moment, whoosh, 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 the puppet fighters all charged at him at the same time. Then, after drawing near, they all attacked him with their spears. Swish, 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 swish. A cold light emanated from the spears, and they appeared as if they could pierce through anything. Jian Wushuang watched calmly as the spear attacks quickly approached him, waiting until the last moment to make his move. The heart-killing sword was already in his hand as he slashed out with a dazzling flash of sword light at a speed that greatly exceeded the incoming spears as it passed the throats of the puppet fighters. With a single strike, he had defeated all the puppet fighters, who then moved back and opened up the path for him. It seems that the obstacle on the first floor is not that difficult. Jian Wushuang smiled and looked forward as he moved on along the path. The puppets that guarded each floor of the Ninth Heaven Road were in the same realm as their challengers. Since Jian Wushuang was in the skyscraping realm, the 10 puppet fighters he encountered were at that realm as well. Among the 20 challengers, those who had reached the divine realm would have to face puppet fighters that possessed the same power as a divine realm expert. As a result, the game was fair to everyone. The challengers could only depend on their comprehension of the Tao, skill, and offensive ability. A moment later, Jian Wushuang arrived at the second floor. Again, there were 10 puppet fighters waiting for him. They were more powerful than the previous 10, but it did not change their fate. As Jian Wushuang continued on, he effortlessly passed through the third, fourth, and fifth floor. However, when he reached the sixth floor, things changed. He found out that there was a qualitative leap in terms of the puppet fighters' power on this floor. However, they were still unable to prevent him from moving forward. The sixth floor, the seventh, the eighth. Jian Wushuang continued on. At the same time, in a big hall of the ancient sect, many palace masters and vice palace masters had gathered together, including Xian Yi. They were watching the progress of the 20 disciples challenging the 9th heaven road. They're moving so fast. Yeah, because it's just the beginning. They will slow down as they go further, especially once they reach the 16th floor. The puppet fighter's power becomes a level stronger every 5 floors, and the 16th floor, which is the middle of the path, is a big obstacle for the challengers. They will all be forced to slow down at that floor. These masters chatted casually while smiling. Things went just as expected. At the first, the 20 disciples were breaking through the blockades very quickly, but as they continued moving forward, they were all forced to slow down. When they finally reached the 16th floor, 19 of them made it to the next floor, while only one person failed. That person was Hua Ying. It's obvious that Hua Ying tried his best. Generally speaking, only those who have comprehended the third occult can defeat the puppet fighters on that floor. He was lucky to even make it that far, given his level of power. One of the vice palace masters commented. Among the 6 geniuses Xian Yi brought back from the Firmament Territory feast, Hua Ying was the weakest, but he has a determined mind. It's possible that he may reach the superior divine realm in the future. Hua Ying was the first one to be thrown out of the wormhole. He displayed a bitter smile under the watchful eyes of the onlookers. He had expected his result, but when the time came, he still could not help feeling embarrassed and frustrated. He had nobody to blame but himself. The remaining 19 disciples continued moving forward, even though most of them visibly became slower after the 16th floor. All of them except for Luo Yong and Donger. These two had comprehended the fourth occult and were much more powerful than the others. Look, Luo Yong has made it to the 20th floor and is still moving at a fast pace. He has not reached his limit yet, so I guess that he should be able to at least make it past the 24th floor. I agree, but I think he will fail to break through the 25th floor. Donger's situation is similar. Chapter 670, Jian Wushuang's Swordsmanship. Chapter 670, Jian Wushuang's Swordsmanship. The masters in the hall all knew very well about the puppet fighter's power. Therefore, based on their disciples' strength, they knew how far they could go. In their eyes, Luo Yong and Donger could definitely break through the 24th floor. As for the others, they also had their judgments on them. Palace Master Destruction, your personal disciple Feng is brilliant. It seemed easy for him to make it to the 18th floor, so I reckon he will get to the 21st floor. The voice came from a black-clothed lady. She was Palace Master Ming Xian, one of the 13 Palace Masters in the Sect, and an expert in the Light Tao. Ha! This boy really surprised me with his progress. As things stand, he should be able to challenge those top disciples now. However, I still don't think he can break through to the 21st floor. The 20th floor sounds more realistic. Even so, he will still be able to keep his place among inner disciples. Someone chimed in. They could tell most of the 19 disciples would not even make it to the 20th floor, so for Feng to make it that far was already quite excellent. Hey, has anyone been paying attention to Jian Wushuang? An icy voice suddenly echoed out. It came from Palace Master Mo Tao, who was good at slaughter Dao and had once wanted to take Jian Wushuang as his personal disciple. Jian Wushuang. On hearing his words, the others immediately looked toward Jian Wushuang and narrowed their eyes. Jian Wushuang was busy fighting the 10 puppet fighters on the 17th floor. One moment, he moved like a shadow, but in the next moment, he was like a sharp sword. Even under the attacks from his 10 opponents, he was still able to move easily, dodge them all. Brilliant! What great swordsmanship! His skill is simple and pure. Every time he strikes, he defuses the puppet fighter's attacks. With swordsmanship, it's always the simpler, the better. Good boy. He's quite talented to have such brilliant skills at such a young age, and he is very close to condensing his sword heart. He deserves to be Xian Yi's nominal disciple. The masters all looked toward Xian Yi unconsciously. They all thought it was because of Xian Yi's guidance that Jian Wushuang was able to make such huge progress. Xian Yi revealed a causal smile to their way of praising his disciple. He knew very well that it was Jian Wushuang's gift in sword principle, not him, that had benefited Jian Wushuang the most. This boy, Palace Master Ming Xian, could not help frowning as she watched Jian Wushuang. Back when Jian Wushuang refused to be a disciple of Palace Masters Baiyu and Mo Tao, his behavior had displeased many of the masters. Ming Xian was one of them. In her eyes, Jian Wushuang was too proud and arrogant. She even had disparaged him while chatting with other masters. However, soon after that, to her surprise, Jian Wushuang comprehended the second sword scar left by Xian Yi and became his nominal disciple, which had been a big blow to her. After that, she began to dislike Jian Wushuang even more. He is only good at sword principle. However, there are so many other things that matter in Ninth Heaven Road other than sword principle. Judging by his current power, he might not be able to break through the 18th floor, and he has to make it to the 19th floor to keep his position as Xian Yi's nominal disciple, Ming Xian said in a mocking tone. The others in the hall smiled at her words but remained silent. Xian Yi, who was standing beside her, kept quiet regarding the discussion and just stared at Jian Wushuang with a smile. He is trying to find his limits in sword principle and take this chance to condense his sword heart. So up till now, he has only used his cultivation in sword principle without applying world Dao and slaughter Dao. However, condensing a sword heart is not easy. After the 17th floor, he will have to use all of his power. On the 17th floor of the Ninth Heaven Road, when Jian Wushuang brandished his sword, there was a flurry of blows, both smooth and elaborate. It seemed like he was battling the puppet fighters effortlessly and even trying to make fun of them, but only he knew that he was at his limit. Indeed, it's quite difficult to condense my sword heart. I will have to wait until there is a better opportunity. Jian Wushuang smiled while looking around at all the puppet fighters. Then his eyes became sharp. Master told me that the better I perform in this competition, the more resources he can obtain for me. From this moment on, I'll stop restraining my power. I really want to see how far I can make it. The next moment, a sliver of light flashed in his eyes, and he released a burst of killing intent. Whoosh! He moved forward like a ghost while striking out with his sword. This move caused a dazzlingly stunning sword light to flash across the sky, which then swept past all the puppet fighters' throats. The 10 puppet fighters were defeated in an instant. When he arrived on the 18th floor, he struck at his targets like lightning. This time, he used his world energy. The moment he struck out, everything seemed to freeze. The 10 puppet fighters on this floor were defeated without struggling. The puppet fighters on the 19th floor suffered the same result. In just a short amount of time, Jian Wushuang had made it to the 20th floor. Chapter 671, Violet Devastation Sword Skill. Chapter 671, Violet Devastation Sword Skill. Jian Wushuang is excellent when it comes to sword skill, but it doesn't mean his comprehension of the Tao is good. Palace Master Ming Xian poured out her words, but when she saw Jian Wushuang quickly break through the 17th, 18th, and 19th floor in an instant, she was struck dumb, and the others were astonished as well. He is so fast. He was stuck on the 17th floor for a long time, wasn't he? How was he suddenly able to break through the 18th and 19th floor in the blink of an eye? The masters could not understand the sudden change. With only a strike on each floor, all the puppet fighters were defeated. Look at his sword. One of the vice palace masters suddenly cried out. The others immediately reacted to the voice and looked at the sword. They could see that all 10 puppet fighters on the 20th floor were diving towards Jian Wushuang aggressively. Then, almost at the same moment, Jian Wushuang made his move, which was followed by the release of an enormous amount of world energy. The floors that Jian Wushuang had passed were filled with dazzling sword light as his sword passed through the bodies of all the puppet fighters. He also cleared this floor with a single strike. How could this be possible? Palace Master Ming Xian's eyes were open wide, and there was a look of horror on her face. His swordsmanship is so terrifying. From his strike, I can tell that he has comprehended up to the 3rd occult and is only a step away from reaching the 4th occult. His comprehension of the world Tao is surprisingly high. There's still more. Look, everyone's eyes were fixed on Jian Wushuang. Under their watchful gazes, Jian Wushuang made it to the 21st floor, on which the puppet fighters were much more powerful than those on the 20th floor. This time, he could not end the battle as quickly as before, but he was still able to overpower his opponents. His sword rushed, surrounded by sword light and carrying an air of killing intent. The mighty power of the world Tao and slaughter Tao were being completely demonstrated by his swordsmanship. Under such powerful attacks, the 10 puppet fighters were forced to retreat. Oh my God, his comprehension of the slaughter Tao is no less than that of the world Tao. Luo Yong and Dong may have reached a higher level in the Tao than Jian Wushuang, but that is just in a single Tao. Jian Wushuang has comprehended the 3rd occult in both the world Tao and slaughter Tao. What's more, his talent in sword principle is really impressive. I agree. Overall, I think he is more powerful than Luo Yong and Dong. These masters were experienced and knowledgeable, so they had a general idea of how powerful Jian Wushuang was. Because of that, they could not deny that in terms of cultivation in sword principle and the Tao, Jian Wushuang was the best among all 20 of the challengers. They believed that Jian Wushuang would actually be able to make it past the 25th floor, while Luo Yong and Dong would probably have to stop on the 25th floor. Monster, this boy has greatly advanced in his comprehension of the Tao over the last 2 years after entering our sect. He is a real super genius. Previously, we thought that he was being conceited, but it seems like we misunderstood him. Complex feelings overwhelmed the masters. Even up till this moment, Xian Yi had remained silent. Jian Wushuang's performance on the 9th Heaven Road was within his expectations, so it was not that surprising. Jian Wushuang continued to break through and challenge higher floors. Just as the masters had expected, it did not take him much time to pass these floors and reach the 25th floor. At a glance, Jian Wushuang could tell that every puppet fighter on that floor was as powerful as the weakest divine realm experts. After exchanging several moves with them, he realized that the puppet fighters' attacks were more skillful and fierce than before. The puppet fighters surrounded him from all directions. Shoop, 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 shoop. A net of spear shadows moved towards him and completely surrounded him. He exerted the power of his sword soul to the extreme and moved forward as if he had become a sword himself. Meanwhile, his heart-killing sword struck out continuously, causing countless sword shadows to sweep through the surroundings. He easily deflected all the spear attacks that were directed towards him. The puppet fighters on this floor are superior to all the ones I've fought before, regardless of whether it's in power, speed, or skill. Not only that, they have good teamwork. It seems like I'll have to rely on some special methods to defeat them. I'll break through with pure power. Jian Wushuang's eyes sparkled. The very next moment, he withdrew the heart-killing sword, took a step backwards, and held the sword with both hands. An overwhelming sword essence continued gathering in the blade as he released a burst of killing intent. The entire space seemed to completely freeze at that moment. Violet Devastation Sword Skill. Chapter 672, Peak Battle Strength. Chapter 672, Peak Battle Strength. Swoosh! A dazzling and splendid bright purple light lit up the sky. Behind it was a terrifying killing intent sought to destroy everything. Jian Wushuang held his sword up with both hands and swung it at two puppet fighters rushing toward him. The puppet fighters' spears also struck out to meet the sword. Clang! Clang! Two crashes were heard, one after the other, and the spears were shattered. However, Jian Wushuang did not stop attacking them and finally defeated them. Jian Wushuang then moved toward the rest of the puppet fighters. Strike after strike, he displayed a brilliant swordsmanship that the puppet fighters could barely fight back against. A short while later, he passed the 25th floor and moved on to the next one. The senior experts in the hall all looked amazed when they saw Jian Wushuang's performance on the 25th floor. His power is so formidable. The skill he displayed just now should be a superior rank 3 secret skill. Wow, even those who have comprehended the fourth occult, like Luo Yong and Donger, can't create a skill at that level, but Jian Wushuang actually did it. His cultivation in sword principle is amazingly high. One could create secret skills based on their comprehension of the Tao and weapons. Jian Wushuang might be weaker than Luo Yong and Donger in comprehending the Tao, but his cultivation of sword principle was far above theirs. That was why he could create the superior rank 3 secret skill, Violet Devastation Sword Skill. It was the most powerful move that he could currently perform. On the 26th floor of the Ninth Heaven Road, Jian Wushuang faced 10 puppet fighters again that were even more powerful than the previous ones. The moment the 10 puppet fighters started moving, Jian Wushuang was suppressed. They attacked him with impressive teamwork and forced him to continuously retreat. He is losing ground. Of course he is. Every puppet fighter on this floor is as powerful as a novice divine realm expert, and only someone above the level of an intermediate divine realm expert could withstand their attacks. He is only in the skyscraping realm, so it's already very impressive for him to make it this far. The 26th floor will be his limit. The experts sighed. Previously, they all thought that Jian Wushuang could make it to the 25th floor at best, and that the 26th floor was beyond his reach. He had not shown any feelings towards Jian Wushuang's situation yet. He just stared at him in silence while thinking, "Boy, show me how far you can go." Under the puppet fighter's powerful attacks, Jian Wushuang was like a drowned mouse. "It looks it's time for me to go all out," he thought while narrowing his eyes. Then, in the next instant, there was a sudden increase in his physical strength. "Piss off." He struck at the puppet fighter in front of him and forced it down, causing the puppet fighter to hit the ground and roll across the floor. Jian Wushuang then turned his sword towards the other puppet fighters and struck out at them like lightning. Clang! Clang, clang, clang. After several sounds of metal colliding against metal, he beat them back a bit. Violet Cataclysm skill. Jian Wushuang's eyes sparkled, and a purple light lit up the sky again. He forced another 3 puppet fighters to retreat. In just a moment, the 10 puppet fighters surrounded him were all beaten back. I have been suppressing my power ever since I came to the eternal world. Not even once have I ever exposed my power to others during the last 2 years in the ancient sect, until this moment. It feels good to be able to go all out after so long. Jian Wushuang clenched his fists and felt the power surging within him. He had a flawless foundation and could release more power than others at the same level as him. Because of this, his body was stronger than other skyscraping realm experts. Overall, this made him more powerful than others. Even when compared to divine realm experts, he was just a little bit weaker. He had restrained his power this whole time, even when he fought with Gong Chao in the Firmament Territory Feast. Only now, on the 26th floor of the 9th Heaven Road, did he finally show his full power. For fear of arousing others' suspicion, I had hidden my real power from the prying eyes and ears at the Firmament Territory Feast. But now things are different. I have to show more power, so I can get more resources from the sect. And the people here won't know that my incredible power is because of my foundation. To be precise, they won't be able to tell that I have a perfect foundation. Before taking part in the sect competition, Jian Wushuang had decided that he would do his utmost in order to obtain more resources from the sect. Come on! Jian Wushuang was thrilled. He held his sword in one hand and gazed at the puppet fighters with his overwhelming battle intent. Kill! He shouted and dived forward. The 10 puppet fighters rushed toward him as well. An instant later, he was locked in an intense fight with them again. However, this time, he had the upper hand. When he attacked, there was a terrifying power behind every one of his exquisite moves. He knocked his opponents away with the full exertion of his power, his comprehension of the Tao, and his skill. He was at the peak of his battle strength. Chapter 673, Jian Wushuang's Limit. Chapter 673, Jian Wushuang's Limit. Bang! Jian Wushuang's sword collided with the weapon from one of puppet fighters and forced the puppet downward. Then, he drew back his sword and quickly stabbed towards the puppet's throat. He was so fast that the puppet couldn't completely defend itself and got hit. 1 defeated, but there are still 9 left. Jian Wushuang smiled. Several minutes ago, he was being overpowered by the puppet fighters and could barely fight back. But now that he had decided to no longer restrain his power, he could battle them with ease. Things continued on in a good direction. One after another, Jian Wushuang quickly defeated the rest of the puppet fighters. Finally, he cleared the 26th floor. The senior experts were startled by the sudden change that occurred between Jian Wushuang and the puppet fighters. What's going on? His power greatly improved. How could he release so much more power in such a short amount of time? The experts were confused. They had thought that the 25th floor was Jian Wushuang's limit, and that there was no way he could pass the 26th floor. So, what they had just witnessed was completely beyond their expectations. He is only in the skyscraping realm, yet he is as powerful as a divine realm expert. I think it should be because of his strong body. He must have practiced some secret skills to strengthen his body, which allowed him to exert more power than other skyscraping realm experts. Palace Master Destruction cried out in astonishment. His strong body. The experts stared at Jian Wushuang closely, no longer paying any attention to the other disciples. At that moment, they were concerned with Jian Wushuang the most. As they continued to watch, they realized it was true. Jian Wushuang had made it this far by relying on his body. Palace Master Xian Yi, is it true that Jian Wushuang has practiced some secret skills to strengthen his body? Palace Master Mo Tao asked Xian Yi. The experts all immediately looked toward Xian Yi. I don't know. Xian Yi shook his head. His answer surprised the experts, who expect him, as Jian Wushuang's master, to know every one of his disciples' skills. I really have no idea about that, Xian Yi added. There are some secret skills in our sect that can be used to strengthen one's body, but our sect regulations limit access to those skills. Only Divine Realm experts are allowed to practice them, and I'm a man of principle. Since Jian Wushuang has not reached that level, there is no way I have given any of those skills to him. As I see it, he already possessed this skill before entering our sect. After hearing that, all the experts were lost in thought. They believed in Xian Yi and knew that he would not lie to them. None of the information from the Firmament Territory Feast revealed that Jian Wushuang possessed this level of strength. This boy is really cunning. He has hidden his real power from us this whole time, even during the Firmament Territory Feast. I reckon if it was not because he wanted to get more resources, he would not have exposed his power to us even now. He is really patient and determined. He truly lives up to his fame as a genius. When those experts looked at Jian Wushuang again, their eyes became frenzied. Without question, they all wanted to have him, a genius with such great talent and a determined mind, as their disciple. He has passed the 26th floor, so I'm curious if he can pass the next floor as well, someone suddenly said. In fact, all the experts were looking forward to seeing what Jian Wushuang did next. They changed their mind. In the beginning, they believed that Jian Wushuang would fail on the 18th floor, which turned out to be wrong. Later, they believed that the 25th floor was his limit, but he had already made it to the 26th floor. At this point, they finally realized that they should give up predicting his performance because they did not know whether he had any trump cards remaining. On the 27th floor of the 9th Heaven Road, Jian Wushuang was facing an even greater pressure than before. He had made a full use of most of his advantages when fighting with the puppet fighters on the 26th floor, and it had still been hard for him to defeat them. Now, facing an even more difficult challenge, the 10 powerful puppet fighter on the 27th floor, he was not sure if he could succeed again. Just fight and see what result is. His eyes were filled with battle intent as he made his move and brought out a second figure that shared his exact appearance. He revealed his two original bodies. Swish, swish. The world body and slaughter body charged at the 10 puppet fighters at the same time, with each body taking on 5 puppets. In no time, the 27th floor was embroiled in 2 intense battles. Doppelganger's secret skill. The experts narrowed their eyes at the scene, but they were not surprised. They had already heard about Jian Wushuang displaying this skill in the Firmament Territory Feast. Chu, a spear attack that was targeting Jian Wushuang's world body quickly drew near. The world body met the spear with a sword, and the sound of the loud collision echoed out. Before the world body could regain his balance, 2 more puppet fighters drew near him and attacked. Seeing that, he hurriedly moved and dodged the attacks. The world body was completely suppressed, as was the slaughter body, who was fighting at the other side. Though the situation was bad, Jian Wushuang remained calm. Chapter 674, Condensing Sword Heart. Chapter 674, Condensing Sword Heart. Jian Wushuang became even calmer during this crisis. He was able to do this because of the many experiences he had while adventuring for all those years in the ancient world. Swish! As his 2 original bodies merged into one, the 10 puppet fighters immediately rushed towards him while slashing at him from all directions. However, he was not afraid at all. At that moment, everything in front of his eyes seemed to disappear, except for his sword, as if only he and the sword were the only things in the world. A sword is like a human being. It has its own feelings. Let your heart become one with it, and it will follow your heart, moving as you intend it to. Xian Yi's words echoed in Jian Wushuang's mind. Let your heart become one with it, and it will follow your heart. As he continually repeated this to himself, there was a gradual change in his swordsmanship. Not only that, his sword soul, which had been floating quietly in the sea of consciousness this whole time, suddenly quivered violently and released a surge of power. Jian Wushuang closed his eyes and focused on sensing it, even though he was currently being attacked by 10 puppet fighters. Even during all that, he did not stop moving, and he even became swifter, enabling him to slowly increase his resistance against the puppet fighters. And all of this was thanks to the insight into sword principle he gained a moment ago from the frenzied attacks raining down on him from all these puppet fighters. As a result, his sword soul began to release an enormous power which slowly flowed towards his sword heart. It was hard to imagine, but Jian Wushuang was experiencing all these things at such a crucial moment, yet it all made sense. He had been learning the sword principle for so long, even while he was still in the ancient world, building his sword soul up until it reached the highest level. Also, during the last 2 years in the ancient sect, he had been cultivating at an amazing speed due to Xian Yi's help. However, he had gradually reached a bottleneck. Therefore, just as Xian Yi had said, with so many accumulations, what he needed was a spark of insight. That spark of insight finally surfaced on the 27th floor. On the previous floor, he had gone all out, which relaxed him. Then, on the next floor, he had been forced to endure an unbearable pressure, which put him under an incredible amount of stress. While facing the contrast between these two feelings, he was finally able to break through the bottleneck. It was completely natural and straightforward. On the 27th floor, the 10 puppet fighters had used every method they had to attack Jian Wushuang. However, they were still repelled by him. At that very moment, Jian Wushuang finished condensing his sword heart, which meant that he could finally open the door and step into the real word of sword principle. Before that moment, he was still just an apprentice, even though he possessed such a strong sword soul, because condensing a sword heart was the first step everyone must take to enter that world. As of now, Jian Wushuang had finally arrived at a vaster road of cultivation. Back inside the Ninth Heaven Road, Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes, and a streak of terrifying sword essence swept out from him. Swish, 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 swish. The puppet fighters were all forced backwards by this sudden release of power. Sword heart. Jian Wushuang clenched his hands and focused on sensing of his sword soul, which had changed from its original form and become a dazzling light in the shape of a sword. This golden light was incredibly sharp, giving off the feeling that there was nothing it couldn't cut through. Is this light my sword heart? Jian Wushuang could sense that the power from this light was much stronger than his sword soul. He was so excited now that he had reached a whole new level in sword principle and could finally control his sword just with his heart. Show me your power, sword heart. Jian Wushuang was full of expectations. He moved towards a nearby puppet fighter and struck out. It seemed to be a casual blow, but with the power of his sword heart, it moved towards its target 10 times faster than before. The puppet fighter spotted Jian Wushuang's move and tried to defend itself, but the sword went through its body before it could even move its spear to defend. Jian Wushuang then turned to other puppet fighters, defeating them all, one by one, so fast that they never even had a chance to fight back against him. The 27th floor was conquered. Going back several moments to the hall in which the experts of the ancient sect were gathered, Everyone's sight was currently focused on Jian Wushuang. He was the only challenger that was still inside the Ninth Heaven Road. The other challengers had all failed and were sent out. When they saw that Jian Wushuang was finally being forced into a corner, they seemed unsure whether he would be able to pass through the current floor. "This is his limit," Palace Master Ming Xin snorted in secret. Xian shook his head while watching the scene. He had the same thought. However, in the next moment, to their surprise, Jian Wushuang closed his eyes after merging his two original bodies into one, yet he was still able to repel the puppet fighters. Upon seeing this, they quickly understood that Jian Wushuang had gained some insight into sword principle. This boy has gained some insight in sword principle. He received insight at such a critical moment. The experts were rather baffled. Then, right at that very moment, they saw Jian Wushuang open his eyes and defeat a puppet fighter with a single strike. Upon seeing that strike, all the experts, including Xian Yi, were amazed. "Sword Heart,"